The maid had been sleeping in the barn for 5 years, until the prince did the unthinkable. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The fog sat low over Ashcroft's fields, as if the land itself wished to keep secrets. Margaret Collins moved quietly, the way she had trained herself to move. Quiet feet, quiet breath, quiet thoughts. If she could make herself small enough, perhaps the world would forget to look for her. The barn was colder tonight, or perhaps she was simply more tired than usual. She drew the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and listened. No owls, no distant laughter from the servants' cottages, only the slow hush of damp air slipping through the boards. Then came a sound that did not belong. Footsteps. Not the careless tread of Thomas Reed passing by with a lantern. Not the soft scurry of a mouse in the grain. These steps had weight, purpose, and they stopped directly outside the barn door. Margaret's stomach turned. No, not tonight, not after 5 years of learning the patterns. No one came here at night unless they meant to. She pushed herself up, keeping her back to the darkest corner. Her hands searched the straw for the small bundle she kept close, a strip of ribbon, a folded scrap of cloth, and a crust of bread she had saved from yesterday. Ridiculous treasures. Her whole life reduced to things she could hide in her palms. The latch moved. Margaret froze. The door opened with a slow groan, and the fog behind it seemed to press forward like a living thing. A silhouette filled the doorway, tall and straight, framed by mist. Margaret's throat closed. She lowered her eyes at once because that was safer than looking. A man's voice cut through the damp air, sharp and controlled. "Who is there?" She did not answer. If she spoke, her voice might betray her. If she remained silent, perhaps he would assume the barn was empty. A step inside. Another. A boot struck a loose plank, and the sound echoed too loudly, as if the barn wished to announce her hiding place. The man moved closer. A faint glint of a pocket watch chain, a well-cut coat, the clean line of a collar. Not a stable hand. Not a farm labourer. Margaret's pulse leapt. A gentleman. No. More than that. The posture was too assured. The air too entitled. She had seen that posture once from a distance, years ago, when the household gathered near the drive for a formal arrival. Her breath caught. It could not be. He spoke again, closer now. "Answer me. Are you injured? Are you stealing? Or are you lost?" Margaret's hands tightened around her bundle. She rose slowly, keeping her body angled toward the side door. One path. One chance. She stepped, but the straw shifted under her. The sound gave her away. The man's head turned sharply. There. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. She could run. She should run. She ran. She shot toward the side door, shoulders tucked, feet quick despite the cold. The moment her fingers touched the rough wood, a hand caught her wrist. Not rough, not cruel, firm. Stop! The word was not shouted, yet it struck like a command that had never been disobeyed. Margaret's breath tore out of her. She twisted, trying to pull free. "Let me go," she whispered. The hand did not tighten. It did not soften either. "I will not harm you," he said, "but you will not bolt like a startled animal and leave me with questions." Margaret's chest burned. She did not want him to see her. She did not want his eyes on her thin dress, her worn sleeves, her hair pinned with a broken comb. She kept her face turned away. "Who are you?" he demanded. She swallowed. Her voice came out small, and she hated it. "No one, sir." His grip loosened enough to allow her to lower her arm, but he did not release her. "No one does not sleep in a barn," he said. "No one does not run when asked a simple question." Margaret's fingers shook. She told herself to stay quiet, but silence had cost her everything already. Silence had kept her alive, yes. It had also kept her trapped. The man leaned slightly, as if trying to see her face without forcing it. "Look at me." She did not. His voice tightened by a degree. "Look at me." Margaret lifted her eyes. For a breath, the world narrowed to one face. He was young, though the set of his jaw tried to pretend otherwise. His hair was dark, neat despite the damp. His eyes were a cool grey, the kind that judged without meaning to. Yet something flickered behind them now. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a wrong he could not immediately name. Margaret's lips parted. The title formed in her mind before she could stop it. Prince Edward Hawthorne of Ashcroft, the master of this estate, the man whose portrait hung in the hall, the one the servants spoke of with careful reverence, as if his name itself could be overheard. Margaret's knees threatened to give. His gaze travelled over her, not with hunger, not with mockery, but with a stiff kind of disbelief. He looked at her hands, rough with work that was never acknowledged. He looked at her shoes, cracked and thin. He looked at her face and seemed to realize all at once that she was not a trespasser passing through. "You know who I am," he said quietly. Margaret's throat tightened. "Yes, Your Highness." The words tasted strange. She had not spoken them in years. His brows drew together. "If you know who I am, then you also know you do not belong here." A bitter laugh nearly escaped her. She swallowed it down. "I do not belong anywhere." That answer made him still. "You are a servant," he said, as if testing the thought against the air. "Or you were. Your speech, your posture. You have been trained." Margaret's hands folded at her waist by instinct, as if she stood in the servants' line again, awaiting inspection. "Yes," she said. "And your name?" She hesitated. Names had power. Names could be dragged into rooms and used like chains. He watched her carefully. "You may tell me." Margaret forced the words out. "Margaret Collins." Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition of her, but recognition of the fact that a name should have been attached to her long ago. "Margaret Collins," he repeated. "I do not recall the name." She gave a small, tight nod. "You were away, Your Highness." "Away," he echoed, and the word sounded like a rebuke aimed at himself. He released her wrist at last, but his eyes did not leave her face. "How long have you been here?" Margaret's mouth went dry. If she told him, it would become real. It would no longer be a nightmare that happened quietly in the dark. It would become a thing that belonged to the day. She stared at the straw beneath her feet. He waited. He was the kind of man who could wait, because he had never been forced to hurry for survival. Margaret's voice was barely more than breath. "A long time." "How long?" he repeated, and this time it was not a request. Margaret closed her eyes. 5 years. The fog seemed to pause outside the door, as if even the mist wished to hear. Edward Hawthorne did not move. He did not speak. The silence stretched so sharply that Margaret feared she had offended him. She feared she had said too much. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate, and the sound held something like restraint. 5 years, he said again. Margaret's fingers dug into her palms. "I did not mean to be found." His voice turned low. "No, you meant to be hidden." Her shoulders tensed. "Please, Your Highness, if you are angry, be angry with me and have it done, but do not—" Her voice caught. "Do not call them here." "Them," he repeated. His gaze narrowed. "Who?" Margaret's instinct screamed at her. "Do not say the housekeeper's name. Do not say the steward's name." Names were dangerous, but his eyes were fixed on her now, as if she were not merely a problem to solve, as if she were a fact that could no longer be ignored. He spoke again. "Why are you in my barn, Miss Collins?" "Miss." The word struck her like a strange kindness. No one had called her that in years. Margaret swallowed. "Because I was told I had no place in the house." "Told by whom?" She shook her head quickly. "It does not matter." "It matters to me," he said. Margaret's laugh came out, sharp and weak. "With respect, Your Highness, everything matters to you. You have the luxury of that." His jaw tightened at her bluntness. But he did not snap. He did not punish her for speaking plainly. "You are cold," he said instead. "You are trembling." Margaret's teeth wanted to chatter, but she forced them still. "I am accustomed to it. That is not an answer that should exist on my estate," he replied. She pressed her lips together. He looked around the barn then, as if seeing it properly for the first time. The corner where she slept, the thin blanket, the makeshift pillow, the small tin cup she used for water. His face hardened. "You have been living like this," he said, and his voice sounded almost amazed, as if the thought offended his sense of order more than his heart. "On my land." Margaret's eyes lowered. "I do not take from the house." "That is not the point." "It is the only point that ever mattered," she murmured. "To them." Edward's gaze snapped back to her. "To them again." Margaret's breath hitched. She had said too much. He stepped closer, not invading, but leaving no room for escape. Tell me what happened. Margaret stared at his boots, boots polished, boots that had never sunk into barn straw for the sake of sleeping. What happened, he repeated, that you have lived in hiding for 5 years? Margaret's throat felt like stone. Words threatened to betray her. Yet something else stirred beneath her fear, a hot, aching resentment, not toward him alone, but toward the whole world that had decided her life could be erased. She spoke without looking up. I was dismissed. For what reason? Margaret hesitated. The old accusation hovered like a shadow. She could not bear to say it aloud. Edward's voice sharpened. For what reason, Miss Collins? She forced herself to breathe. They said I stole. Edward's eyes narrowed, not at her, but at the idea. What did you steal? Margaret's hands twisted together. A brooch. He waited. She swallowed hard. A lady's brooch. Edward did not ask which lady. He did not say, that seems unlikely. He said something worse. And you did not leave, he stated. I tried, she replied, and the words came out before she could stop them. I walked to the village. I stood outside the inn. I asked for work. I asked for a place to sleep. She finally lifted her eyes, and her gaze met his with a kind of tired defiance. And then, she continued, someone from the house came. Not you. Never you. Someone who had power. They said, if I stayed in the village, they would make certain I was taken to the magistrate. They said my word would not matter. Edward's face went still. Margaret's voice grew steadier, as if each word was a stone placed carefully on the ground. They said I could either disappear quietly or be made an example. Edward spoke through clenched restraint. Who said this? Margaret shook her head again. It does not matter now. It matters, he said, and there was steel beneath the calm. You are on my land. You were my responsibility, whether I acknowledged it or not. The word struck Margaret oddly. Responsibility. She had never been considered a responsibility, only an inconvenience. Edward's gaze softened by a fraction. Have you eaten today? Margaret stiffened. I do not need... Answer, he said, not harshly, but firmly. She lowered her eyes. A little. What is a little? Margaret's lips tightened. Bread. He glanced at her bundle. Is that what you are clutching? Your supper? Margaret's fingers curled tighter around it. It is mine. I am not taking it, he said. I am trying to understand how this happened under my name. His voice lowered then, and for the first time, Margaret heard something that sounded less like command and more like discomfort. 5 years. Margaret's throat burned. She did not want his pity. Pity was another form of power. Edward straightened as if coming to a decision. You will come inside. Margaret's head snapped up. No. He blinked, not used to refusal. Margaret took a step back. No, Your Highness. His jaw tightened. You would prefer the barn. I would prefer not to be dragged into the house like a story to be whispered about, she said, and the words came fast now, as if they had been waiting. If they see me, they will say I am trying to return. They will say I am insolent. They will make it my fault again. Edward's expression flickered. Who is they? Margaret swallowed. He held her gaze. Someone has made you afraid of my household. Margaret's laugh was brittle. Your household has done it, Your Highness. The air between them sharpened. Edward's voice dropped. Do you believe I would allow anyone to harm you? The word harm made Margaret's skin prickle. She imagined being seized, not with hands but with authority. Being marched out, labelled, condemned. She had lived in terror of papers and signatures, of a man in a robe reading out her fate. No, she said quickly, and then corrected herself because honesty mattered in strange ways. I do not know what you would allow. I do not know you. Edward's eyes widened slightly, as if he had never been spoken to with such blunt truth. Margaret lifted her chin. I know only what your house has allowed, for 5 years. His mouth tightened. He looked away for a moment, as if to breathe around anger that had nowhere proper to land. When he looked back, his voice was controlled. Miss Collins, he said, I'm going to ask you something, and I expect a truthful answer. Margaret's fingers trembled around the ribbon in her bundle. Why did you stay here? He asked. Not in the village, not on the road. Here. Margaret's eyes flicked to the barn wall, the mark she had made with a nail, counting seasons. the corner where she had hidden when storms raged, the place where she had learned to sleep in small, tight curls so the cold would not seep into her bones as deeply. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Because the barn is still on the estate, and the estate is the only place I know. I was brought here when I was 17. I worked here. I learned every corridor, every rule. When they dismissed me, they did not give me wages owed. They did not give me a letter. They did not give me anything that would allow me to begin again." Edward's eyes narrowed. "No wages." Margaret's voice remained calm, though her hands betrayed her. "They said my wages would be held until the matter was settled. Then they said the matter was settled and I was to go. But they never paid me. And without wages, without a letter, without a family nearby," she swallowed. "I had nothing but this place." His gaze sharpened at the last part. "You have no family?" Margaret's mouth tightened. "I have a father. He is a tenant farmer in a different county. We are not—" She stopped herself, then forced the truth out. "We are not close. He sent me to service because he could not feed all of us. I did not write to him, because I did not want him to know I had been accused." Edward held her gaze. "So you endured this to protect your pride?" Margaret's lips parted, offended. "Not pride. What then?" She looked down at her hands. "Shame." The word fell like a stone. Edward's face shifted. His eyes softened, but his posture remained rigid, as if kindness had to be held in check by discipline. He asked quieter now, "Did you steal the brooch?" Margaret's head lifted sharply. The insult cut deep, not because he asked, but because it reminded her how easily the world assumed guilt. "No," she said, and her voice did not waver. "I did not." Edward's eyes did not leave her face. "Did anyone accuse you without proof?" "Yes." "Did anyone give you a chance to defend yourself?" Margaret's mouth tightened. They did not need to. They had already decided. Edward's nostrils flared slightly. He looked away again, and for a moment he seemed like a man trying to fit the pieces into an order he could tolerate. Then he looked back, and his voice was clipped. "You are coming inside." Margaret's heart lurched. "No." His brows drew together, frustration showing at last. "Must you make it difficult?" Margaret's eyes flashed. "Must you?" The boldness surprised her as soon as it left her mouth. She braced for reprimand. Edward did not reprimand her. He stared as if her anger were evidence he could not deny. Margaret spoke quickly before fear could choke her again. "If you bring me into the house tonight, they will whisper. They will stare. They will decide what I am, and then they will punish me for not being what they want." Edward's jaw clenched. "They will not." "They will try," she said, and her voice turned urgent. "And if you leave tomorrow, if you go back to London or wherever princes go, they will still be here, and I will still be the girl in the barn." The words hung between them, too honest to ignore. Edward's gaze steadied. "I am not leaving tomorrow." Margaret stared. "You say that now." He stepped closer, and this time his presence did not feel like a threat. It felt like a wall placed between her and the darkness she had learned to accept. "I returned tonight because I received word of irregularities in my steward's accounts," he said. "I intended to look into it quietly. Now I find a woman living like a secret in my barn. This will not be handled quietly." Margaret's blood turned cold. "Quiet is safer. Quiet is how this happened," he replied. Margaret swallowed. "If you speak of me, they will claim I am mad. They will say I am lying to gain sympathy." Edward's mouth tightened. "Let them." Margaret's hands clenched. "You do not understand." "Then make me understand," he said, and his voice was firm, but not cruel. "Tell me who did this." Margaret shook her head, panic rising. "I cannot." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Cannot or will not?" Margaret's voice trembled. "If I speak, I will be crushed. It is easy to crush someone like me." He stared at her, and the silence pulsed. Then his voice lowered. "Miss Collins, you have been crushed already." Margaret flinched, because the truth stung more than any accusation. Edward took a slow breath. "Listen to me." She listened, because she had no choice and because something in his tone demanded attention rather than obedience. "I will not force you into the manor tonight," he said, "not if you truly believe it will place you in danger." Margaret's shoulders loosened a fraction, relief sharp and brief. "But," he continued, and the word tightened the air again, I will not walk away from this, not now that I have seen it. Margaret's throat tightened. You will speak to them. I will, Edward said. Margaret shook her head quickly. Do not. I must, he replied. You have lived 5 years as if you were nothing. Someone made that decision. Someone enforced it. And someone benefited from your silence. Margaret's eyes stung. She forced the tears back, because tears had never protected her. Edward's gaze held hers. You may stay here tonight if you insist, but you will not be alone. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? He glanced toward the open door. I will have a lamp placed outside, and someone trustworthy will be stationed nearby. Margaret's breath hitched. No one is trustworthy. Edward's voice turned crisp. You will not command my household. Margaret's chin lifted. And you will not command my fear. For a moment, he looked as if he might argue. Then something in his expression shifted, as if he respected the strength behind her stubbornness. He nodded once. Very well. Not someone. I will return myself. Margaret blinked. Your Highness. I am not leaving you to wonder what comes next, he said. And I am not leaving you to them. Her heart beat unevenly. The words sounded too grand to be safe. Edward's gaze dropped to the bundle in her hands. Will you eat that bread? Margaret's fingers loosened slightly. Yes. Good, he said, and it sounded absurdly like approval. Do you have water? Margaret hesitated, then pointed to the tin cup. Edward looked around once more, and the muscles in his jaw tightened again. He turned back to her. Miss Collins, he said, I will ask one more thing. Margaret's spine stiffened. Do you wish to leave this estate? He asked. If I provide wages owed and a proper reference, would you go? The question struck her harder than any command. Leave, to step beyond the boundaries she had memorized, to stand in a new place where no one knew her shame. Margaret swallowed. I do not know. Edward's eyes softened slightly. You do not have to decide tonight. Margaret looked down at her ribbon, the torn strip of cloth that reminded her of a uniform she had once worn with pride. She could not explain why she kept it, perhaps because it proved she had been real. Edward spoke again, quieter. But you will not remain hidden. Margaret's voice was raw. Hidden is all I have. Edward's gaze sharpened. Then I will give you more. Margaret almost laughed at the certainty in his tone. Princes spoke like that. They assumed the world could be rearranged because they wished it, yet his eyes held something she did not expect. Discomfort, yes, and anger, but also a kind of determination that did not seem performative. He stepped back, giving her space at last. Eat, he said, and wait. Margaret's chest tightened. Wait for what? Edward turned toward the door. The fog wrapped around him, as if reluctant to let him go. Wait for me, he said, because I am going to learn who decided you could be discarded like refuse, and I am going to make them answer for it. Margaret's fear flared. Answer. That word meant consequences. Consequences meant retaliation. Retaliation always fell on the weak. Your Highness, she whispered, voice breaking despite herself. Please, if you stir them, they will not forgive me. Edward paused at the threshold. He looked back at her, and his face was set with a calm that felt more dangerous than rage. They will not be asked to forgive you, he said. They will be asked to explain themselves. And then he was gone into the fog, his steps steady across the damp ground. Margaret stood frozen, her bread forgotten in her hand. The barn felt suddenly smaller, not because it had changed, but because her secret had been seen. She listened. Footsteps faded toward the manor. A door opened somewhere in the distance. Voices murmured faintly, indistinct. Margaret sank back onto the straw, trying to swallow, trying to breathe, trying not to shake. 5 years of surviving by being invisible, and now a prince had looked at her and refused to look away. She pressed her fist to her mouth as if she could hold her panic inside. The manor lights glowed through the fog like distant eyes, and then, carried by the damp night air, she heard Edward's voice rise, clear and cutting, from the direction of the great hall. Send for Mrs. Blackwood at once, he said, and Margaret's stomach dropped as she realized her hiding had ended, and the household's true judgment was about to begin. Margaret did not move from the straw for a long time. She held her breath, listening for the sound that would tell her whether she had just been saved or sentenced. The manor voices were too far to make out words, but the tone carried. A clipped command. A reply that sounded too smooth. Then another voice, older and sharper, like a blade made of etiquette. Margaret pressed her fist against her mouth. This was how it began, she thought. Not with shouting, with doors opening. Footsteps returned across the damp ground. Margaret stiffened and shrank back into the shadowed corner. Her mind raced through the only plan she had ever used. Vanish. Hide. Become nothing again. But the footsteps stopped outside the barn, and a familiar voice called softly, "Margaret." It was Thomas Reed. Margaret let out a breath that trembled. She stood slowly, keeping her bundle close. Thomas appeared in the doorway, lantern held low. His face was tense, his eyes darting behind him, as if the fog itself might carry gossip. "You should not be here," Margaret whispered. Thomas shook his head. "I had no choice. He asked for you." Margaret's throat tightened. "He asked for me." Thomas stepped inside, lowering his voice further. "The prince has the house in a stir. Mrs. Blackwood came down like she owned the place. Mr. Crane is with her. Lady Beatrice, too." Margaret's hands went cold. "Lady Beatrice." Thomas nodded grimly. "Aye, and you know what that means." Margaret did. Lady Beatrice meant appearances. It meant order that did not bend for truth. She swallowed hard. "Tell him I am not coming." Thomas's brows drew together. "I tried to say you were frightened." He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. Then he said, very calm, that you would be treated with respect. Margaret gave a short, bitter breath. "Respect is not a blanket." Thomas stepped closer, careful not to touch her. "Margaret, he is not speaking like Mrs. Blackwood. He is not speaking like Mr. Crane. He is speaking like a man who just learned something that will not let him sleep." Margaret's heart hammered. "He will leave, Thomas. He will return to whatever princes do, and I will still be here." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Not if he puts his foot down." Margaret stared at the lantern flame. "And if he does not?" Thomas hesitated. That hesitation answered her more than words ever could. Margaret's shoulders sank. "If I go in there, they will look at me as if I am a stain." Thomas's voice softened. "They already do, Margaret. The difference is, now someone is asking why." Margaret's fingers tightened around her bundle. She hated the way hope tried to rise. Hope was dangerous. Hope made a person careless. Thomas added, "He said, and I quote him proper, that you would not be spoken over." Margaret almost laughed. "Then he does not know them." Thomas straightened. "Maybe he will learn." The fog pressed in at the doorway. Margaret stood caught between the barn she knew and the house that had erased her. Thomas shifted his lantern. "Will you come?" Margaret's voice was hoarse. "If I refuse?" Thomas's eyes flicked away. "Then Mrs. Blackwood will claim you are hiding, because you are guilty. And Mr. Crane will nod, and Lady Beatrice will say it is best left alone." Margaret's stomach turned. Best left alone. Those words had built her prison. She took a shallow breath. "All right." Thomas blinked. "All right?" Margaret lifted her chin, though it shook. "I will go, but I will not beg." Thomas's face softened. "That's the Margaret I remember." Margaret followed him out, each step toward the manor feeling like stepping onto a stage she had been forbidden to enter. They did not go through the front doors. Thomas led her around to the side entrance near the kitchens, where the stone steps were worn by servant feet. Even there she was seen. A scullery maid froze with a tray in her hands. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, then shut again as if words were too risky. A footman near the corridor stared openly, then looked away too late. Margaret kept her eyes forward, her hands folded, her posture straight, because if she slumped, they would think they were right about her. If she trembled, they would think it proved something. As they passed the pantry, a whisper slid from behind a door. "That's her." Another whisper, sharper. "I thought she was gone." She was, until now. Margaret did not flinch, not outwardly. Inside, each whisper landed like a stone. Thomas led her up a narrow servant's stair that she had once climbed 100 times a day. Her feet remembered the rhythm, even if her life had forgotten. At the top, Thomas paused. "They're in the sitting room." Margaret's throat tightened. The sitting room, where guests took tea, where voices were meant to sound pleasant and controlled. Thomas murmured. He asked that you be brought in with dignity. Margaret gave him a quick look. Dignity? Thomas's mouth tightened. It was his word, not mine. The door ahead was shut. Light spilled beneath it. Thomas lifted his hand to knock. A voice from inside called, "Enter." Thomas opened the door. Margaret stepped in and felt the room's attention hit her like a gust of cold air. Prince Edward stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid with restraint. He did not sit. That alone told Margaret he was not treating this as a polite conversation. Lady Beatrice sat on a settee with a straight spine and a face that had learned to show concern without showing fear. Her gaze fixed on Margaret immediately, measuring, appraising, trying to decide what story Margaret represented. Mrs. Blackwood stood near the tea table as if she owned even the air above it. Her expression was composed, almost mild, only her eyes were sharp. And Mr. Crane stood beside a small writing desk, a ledger tucked under his arm, his mouth set in the practiced shape of someone ready to explain anything. Margaret's pulse thudded in her ears. Edward's eyes met hers at once. He nodded just slightly, as if to remind her she was not alone. "Miss Collins," he said, "thank you for coming." Mrs. Blackwood's gaze snapped to Edward, then to Margaret. Her voice was smooth as polished wood. "Your Highness, must we involve her at this hour? The girl is clearly unwell." Margaret's cheeks burned. Unwell, as if poverty were a sickness of the mind. Edward answered without looking away from Margaret. "She is involved already." Lady Beatrice lifted her chin. "Edward, darling, we all understand your concern, but surely this can be managed with discretion." Edward's jaw tightened. Discretion is often another word for hiding. Lady Beatrice's lips pressed together. "It is a word for preserving dignity." Margaret heard the unspoken part, preserving the family name. Edward turned slightly toward Lady Beatrice. "Whose dignity?" A silence dropped. Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, hands folded. "Your Highness, if I may, this is a misunderstanding. The girl was dismissed years ago for behavior that made her unsuitable for service. We offered her the chance to leave with..." "With what?" Edward asked. Mrs. Blackwood blinked once, a controlled pause. "With instruction to seek proper employment elsewhere." Edward's gaze sharpened. "Did she leave with a reference?" Mrs. Blackwood smiled faintly. "One does not provide references to those dismissed for misconduct." Margaret's fingers curled tighter, nails pressing into her palms. Edward's voice remained calm. "Did she leave with wages owed?" Mr. Crane cleared his throat. "Your Highness, that is a complicated matter. There were certain deductions." Margaret's head lifted sharply despite herself. Edward's eyes flicked to Mr. Crane. "Deductions?" Mr. Crane nodded earnestly. "For damages, for missing items, for a brooch," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the room before she could stop it. Lady Beatrice's brows rose as if Margaret had committed a new offence simply by speaking. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "You see? She remembers what suits her." Edward held up a hand, not harsh, but final. "Mrs. Blackwood, you will not address her as if she is not in the room." Mrs. Blackwood's smile did not change. "Of course, Your Highness." Edward turned to Margaret. "You were accused of stealing a brooch." Margaret stood straight. "Yes." "Did you steal it?" Margaret's voice was steady. "No." Mrs. Blackwood gave a faint sound of disbelief. "Your Highness, you must understand. She was found near the ladies' chambers." Margaret's throat tightened. She had been found near the linen closet because she had been told to fetch sheets. But they never cared about that detail. Edward asked, "Whose brooch was it?" Mrs. Blackwood glanced toward Lady Beatrice with practiced deference. "It belonged to Lady Beatrice." Lady Beatrice's expression tightened. "It was a gift, a family piece." Margaret's stomach turned. A family piece. That made the accusation heavier. That made it more useful as a weapon. Edward's gaze moved between them. "And this brooch vanished, and you decided the culprit was Miss Collins." Mr. Crane spoke quickly. "There were circumstances, Your Highness. The girl was newly assigned to upper corridors. There were rumors she had sticky fingers." Margaret's breath caught. Rumors. That was all it took. A rumor could become a verdict. Edward's voice chilled. "Rumors are not evidence." Mrs. Blackwood's smile thinned. Evidence is often what respectable households must interpret, Your Highness. We cannot wait until thieves confess. Margaret's throat tightened with anger. You did not wait. You did not ask. You did not even look. Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. Margaret Collins, mind your tone. Margaret's hands trembled, but she did not step back. My tone, my lady, is what remains when a person has been spoken over for years. A hush fell. Edward looked at Margaret, then at Lady Beatrice. She will speak. She has earned that. Lady Beatrice's jaw tightened. Edward, this is not proper. Edward's voice was quiet. Neither is a servant sleeping in a barn for 5 years. Mrs. Blackwood lifted her brows. Your Highness, forgive me, but the barn arrangement was not an arrangement at all. She chose it. She refused help. She is difficult. Margaret stared at her. Help. Mrs. Blackwood turned to her with a thin politeness. We cannot force charity on those who will not behave. Margaret's voice came out low. Charity is not what you offered. Edward's gaze snapped back to Margaret. What did they offer? Margaret's chest tightened. She felt the room waiting for her to stumble, to cry, to beg. She would give them none of that. They offered me a choice, she said. Disappear quietly or be made an example. Mr. Crane's face went stiff. That is a serious claim. Margaret looked at him. It was a serious threat. Lady Beatrice leaned forward slightly, her tone measured. Margaret, if you were wronged, you should have come to me. Margaret almost laughed, but the sound would have broken something in her. My lady, I tried to speak once. Mrs. Blackwood told me you were occupied. Mr. Crane told me I had forfeited my right to be heard. Mrs. Blackwood's voice remained smooth. I told you the household had standards. Margaret's eyes stung. She forced them to remain dry. You told me no one would believe me. Edward's voice sharpened. Did you say that, Mrs. Blackwood? Mrs. Blackwood looked mildly wounded. Your Highness, I may have warned her that accusations of theft are taken seriously. Edward took one step forward. No. I asked if you told her no one would believe her. Mrs. Blackwood's smile became careful. Your Highness, I cannot recall every conversation from 5 years ago. Margaret's hands clenched. She could recall it as if it were carved into her bones. Edward turned to Mr. Crane. Produce her dismissal papers. Mr. Crane blinked. Your Highness? The papers, Edward repeated. The document that shows when and why she was dismissed, signed by the proper authority, filed under estate records. Mr. Crane shifted. It was misfiled, perhaps. Edward's gaze did not waver. Produce it. Mr. Crane's mouth tightened. I will have to consult the archives. Edward's voice turned sharper, though still controlled. Now. Mr. Crane hesitated. Mrs. Blackwood stepped in. Your Highness, these demands are unnecessary. The girl is clearly unstable. She has lived in the barn because she refuses to accept reality. If we entertain this, we encourage— Enough, Edward said, and the single word cut through her like a door slammed shut. Mrs. Blackwood went still. Edward faced her fully now. You will not call her unstable again. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes flickered. Your Highness, I am only trying to protect the household. Edward's tone was cold. From whom? The woman who slept in straw while you drank tea? Lady Beatrice rose, her voice firm. Edward. Edward turned to her, but his calm did not soften. Aunt Beatrice, please. Lady Beatrice's eyes widened a fraction at the title. Aunt, a reminder of family, of hierarchy. She had been his guide in society, and he was now asking her to step aside. Lady Beatrice took a breath. If this is true, it is regrettable, but airing it at night, with servants listening outside doors, is not wise. People talk. Margaret heard the truth behind the words. Scandal. Edward's jaw tightened. For they should talk. Lady Beatrice's voice sharpened. Edward, you are the Prince of Ashcroft. People do not forgive a household that cannot govern its own staff. Margaret's stomach twisted. Govern, as if she were a storm to be managed. Edward's gaze did not falter. Then let my household learn to govern itself with justice. Mrs. Blackwood tilted her head, her voice almost gentle. Your Highness speaks of justice. Yet he has not considered that this girl may be using pity to climb. Margaret's breath caught. Edward's eyes flashed. Climb to what? To a warm bed? To bread that is not mouldy, to a name that is not spat. Mrs. Blackwood's smile stayed in place, but her eyes hardened. Edward turned abruptly toward the door. Thomas. Thomas stepped in at once. Your Highness, Edward said, fetch Dr. Whitmore. Tell him to come before dawn. And tell him I require his testimony, not his sympathy. Thomas nodded quickly. At once, Your Highness. Lady Beatrice's face tightened. Edward, calling a doctor for this is excessive. Edward answered without looking at her. It is necessary. Margaret's throat tightened. Testimony, as if she were a case, yet part of her understood. In this world, truth needed witnesses, or it would be treated as a story. Edward looked back at Margaret. Do you wish to speak further? Margaret's hands trembled. She forced them still. I wish to stop being treated as if I am a rumour. Edward's gaze held hers. Then speak. Margaret swallowed. The room's attention pressed down on her. Mrs. Blackwood's composure, Mr. Crane's measured watchfulness, Lady Beatrice's tight concern. She spoke carefully, choosing each word like stepping stones over deep water. I worked here, she said. I served in the kitchens first, then as a housemaid. I was never late. I was never insolent. I kept my head down. I did what I was told. Mrs. Blackwood's voice slid in. And yet the brooch disappeared. Margaret looked at her. Yes. And you decided that was enough. Edward's tone was quiet. Continue. Margaret's throat burned. They brought me to Mrs. Blackwood's office. Mr. Crane was there. They told me what I had done. They did not ask what I had done. They told me. Mr. Crane's mouth tightened. I do not recall. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You recall well enough. Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. Margaret! Edward's gaze snapped to Lady Beatrice. Let her speak. Margaret drew a steadying breath. They said my wages would be held. They said the matter would be settled if I confessed. I did not confess because I did not steal it. Then they said my stubbornness proved guilt. Mrs. Blackwood's smile was faint. Stubbornness often does. Edward's eyes flashed. Mrs. Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood inclined her head. Forgive me, Your Highness. Margaret's voice tightened. They told me to leave the estate. I asked for my wages. They said no. I asked for a letter. They said no. I asked to speak to someone above them. Lady Beatrice's face softened, but only slightly. And you did not come to me. Margaret's eyes stung again. Because Mrs. Blackwood said you would not see me. Mrs. Blackwood's expression did not change. Your Highness, if I may. I protected Lady Beatrice from unnecessary distress. Edward stared at her. You protected her from hearing the truth. Mrs. Blackwood's smile sharpened. I protected the household from chaos. Margaret's hands clenched. How you protected yourself? A silence snapped into place. Mr. Crane shifted his weight. Your Highness, even if there were errors in procedure, this young woman has survived on the estate by her own choice. No one chained her to the barn. Margaret's voice came out low. No one had to. You used fear instead. Mr. Crane's brows rose. Fear of what? Margaret lifted her chin. Fear of being dragged before the magistrate with a story already written. Fear of being called a thief until it became the only name I had. Edward's jaw tightened. He looked at her for a moment, then asked, Why did you not leave Father? Why remain here at all? Margaret's voice thinned. Because I knew the land. Because I thought foolishly that if the truth ever surfaced, it would surface here. Because I did not want to be found in the road like a stray. Lady Beatrice's face tightened at the word stray, as if the very concept offended her. Edward said, You were never a stray, you were my servant. Margaret's throat tightened and she looked away quickly, not wanting her eyes to betray her. Mrs. Blackwood's voice returned, silk over stone. Your Highness is sentimental. It is understandable. But the estate cannot function on sentiment. Servants must be managed. Edward's gaze snapped to her. Servants are people. Mrs. Blackwood smiled as if indulging a child. Of course, but people must know their place. Margaret's breath caught. Edward's voice was dangerous in its quiet. And where was her place these 5 years, Mrs. Blackwood? Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. She was not in my charge. She was dismissed. Edward turned to Mr. Crane. Then if she was dismissed, show me the papers. Mr. Crane's face tightened further. Your Highness, The records for that year were transferred. There was a flood in the lower archive and— Edward cut him off. "Do not lie to me." Mr. Crane swallowed. "I am not lying." Edward stepped closer. "Then you are incompetent." A sharp breath left Lady Beatrice. Edward's gaze did not move from the steward. "Which is it, Mr. Crane? Dishonest or incompetent?" Mr. Crane's jaw tightened. "Your Highness." Edward's voice was calm. "Answer." Mr. Crane's eyes flicked to Mrs. Blackwood, then back to Edward. "There may have been a lapse in filing." Edward's gaze turned cold. "A lapse that resulted in a woman sleeping in a barn." Margaret's hands trembled. She forced herself to speak, because if she did not, they would twist the story. "I was not dismissed with mercy," she said. The room went quiet. Edward looked at her. "Say that again." Margaret drew a breath, and the words came out like truth sharpened by years. "I was not dismissed, Your Highness," she said. "I was discarded." Lady Beatrice's face changed then, a flicker of something like shock, as if the word discarded finally made the situation too ugly to ignore. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes hardened. Edward held Margaret's gaze for a long moment, then nodded once as if he had just accepted a vow. He turned to the others. "This meeting is not over, but it will be paused." Lady Beatrice's brows lifted. "Paused?" Edward said. "I will not conduct this solely on words. Dr. Whitmore will examine Miss Collins. He will speak to her condition and her fear, and then we will speak again, with facts." Mr. Crane cleared his throat. "Your Highness, involving outside professionals will what?" Edward asked. "Make it harder to pretend?" Mr. Crane's mouth tightened. Edward added, "Miss Collins will be given a room tonight." Margaret's breath caught. She had not expected that. Mrs. Blackwood's head snapped up. "Your Highness, with respect, that is improper." Edward's eyes turned to her. "Improper is what you have allowed." Lady Beatrice's voice sharpened. "Edward, a room in the manor implies restoration. It implies endorsement. People will talk." Edward looked at her steadily. "Then let them talk about this, that a woman who served in this house will not sleep in straw another night." Margaret's hands clenched. She wanted to say she did not want charity. She wanted to say she did not want to be a subject of whispers, but her body remembered cold too well to refuse warmth out of pride. Edward's voice softened slightly as he addressed her. "You will be near the kitchen corridor, not in the servants' quarters, not in the guest wing. A small room, a safe one." "Safe." The word made Margaret's throat tighten. She did not know what safe felt like anymore. Mrs. Blackwood's smile returned, thin. "Your Highness is generous." Edward answered without warmth. "I am late." Thomas returned, breathless. "Your Highness, Dr. Whitmore will come at first light. He said he will not delay." Edward nodded. "Good." Then Edward said, "Thomas, take Miss Collins to the small room by the back stairs. Ensure she has food and water. No one is to disturb her. Is that understood?" Thomas bowed his head. "Yes, Your Highness." Mrs. Blackwood's voice was sweet. "Of course. We would never disturb her." Margaret's stomach turned at the sweetness. Edward looked at Mrs. Blackwood and Mr. Crane. "You will remain available." Mr. Crane swallowed. "Your Highness, it is late." Edward's gaze did not soften. "Yes." Lady Beatrice rose slowly. "Edward, I must speak with you privately." Edward's jaw tightened. "Not tonight." Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. "Edward," he turned to her, and his voice was firm, but not cruel. "Aunt Beatrice, I respect you. But your concern for appearances has already cost someone 5 years of her life." Lady Beatrice's lips parted, then closed again. Her face tightened. "You are accusing me." Edward's voice was quiet. "I am asking you to look at what happened while all of us looked away." Lady Beatrice's shoulders stiffened. "People in our position cannot indulge every misfortune." Margaret felt her face heat, anger rising, but Edward spoke before she could. "This is not misfortune," Edward said. "This is a choice someone made." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. "And what do you intend to do? Put the household on trial?" Edward held her gaze. "If that is what it takes to find the truth," Lady Beatrice's mouth tightened. "Edward, think of your name." Edward's reply was immediate. "I am." Margaret's breath caught. She could not tell if his words meant protection or ruin. Thomas touched Margaret's elbow lightly, not pulling, only guiding. "Come on," he murmured, before they start again. Margaret followed him out, the room's eyes pressing into her back. In the corridor, servants pretended to be busy, hands polishing air, eyes fixed on invisible tasks. Yet Margaret felt every glance. A maid she barely remembered whispered to another, "That's her, I swear it is." Another voice replied, "How does she still stand?" Margaret's hands shook. She forced them still by clasping them tighter. Thomas led her to a small room near the back stairs. It was plain. A narrow bed, a basin, a chair, a latch on the door that felt like both safety and imprisonment. Thomas placed a tray down. Bread, soup, water. He looked at her with worry. "Eat." Margaret's throat tightened. "Thank you." Thomas's eyes flicked toward the corridor. "Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Blackwood is not the forgiving type." Margaret gave a short breath. "Neither is Lady Beatrice." Thomas hesitated. "The prince is something else." Margaret's hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. "He is a prince." Thomas nodded. "Aye, which means he can do something about it." Margaret stared into the soup. "Or he can decide it is not worth the trouble." Thomas's mouth tightened. He looked at Mrs. Blackwood like she was dirt under his boot. Margaret's stomach turned. "And then he will leave and she will look at me the same way." Thomas leaned closer, voice low. "Listen to me. Lock this door. Do not open it for anyone except me, the doctor, or the prince. Do you understand?" Margaret's pulse jumped. "Why?" Thomas's eyes were grim. "Because when those like Mrs. Blackwood lose control, they grow inventive." Margaret's skin prickled. "No one will touch me." Thomas's gaze held hers. "They don't have to touch you to ruin you." Margaret swallowed hard. Thomas added softer, "You did right by speaking." Margaret's voice was small. "Did I?" Thomas nodded once. "Yes, eat. I'll come back when I can." He slipped out and closed the door. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, spoon trembling in her hand, and forced herself to eat even as her stomach knotted. Minutes passed. Then more. Outside her door, faint sounds drifted through the hall. A maid's hurried step, a whisper that stopped when someone approached. Then a deeper voice, controlled and unmistakable, spoke nearby. "Edward." Margaret froze. The voice did not call for her. It was directed elsewhere. She could not make out every word, but she caught a few. "Bring the ledgers. And the key. No excuses." Margaret's throat tightened. She set the tray aside and pressed her ear lightly toward the door, ashamed of herself, but unable to stop. Another voice answered, oily with compliance. "Mr. Crane." "Your Highness, surely this can wait until morning." Edward's reply was quiet, and that quietness made it sound like iron. "It has waited 5 years." Footsteps moved away. Margaret sat back, heart racing. If he dug too deep, they would turn on her. They would claim she had tempted him into scandal. They would paint her as ungrateful, deceitful, grasping. She stared at the latch on the door. She could run. She could slip out the window, return to the barn, hide where she had always hidden. But her body was warm for the first time in so long that it felt like a sin. She stayed. Down the hall, voices rose again. Not shouting. Controlled tension. Lady Beatrice's tone crisp. "Edward, you are exhausting yourself." Edward's reply. "I am awake at last." Mrs. Blackwood's voice, smooth. "Your Highness, may I remind you the staff will be unsettled by all this." Edward. "They should be." A pause. Then footsteps moved farther away, and Margaret could hear nothing clearly anymore. She sat very still, listening to the manor breathe around her, and the fear returned in waves. They would call her a liar. They would say she had made it up for attention. They would say she was trying to climb, as Mrs. Blackwood had suggested. Margaret pressed her hands together until her knuckles ached. Somewhere in the lower corridor, a door opened with a firm sound. Then another. A drawer slid. Paper rustled. Margaret imagined Edward in an office with ledgers and locks, his face set, his hands steady as he searched for proof. If he found nothing, they would smile and say, "See? A troubled girl, a misunderstanding, a matter best left alone." If he found something, they would become dangerous in different ways. Her stomach twisted. Time passed. The corridor fell quiet. Too quiet. Then footsteps returned, brisk and purposeful. A key turned somewhere, metal against metal. A cabinet door creaked open. Margaret's breath caught as if she could hear it through walls. Then, through the hush, Edward's voice spoke again. Not loud, not for an audience, for himself. "What is this?" Mr. Crane's voice answered too quickly. "Your Highness, I assure you it is nothing of consequence." Edward's tone sharpened. "Nothing of consequence does not hide behind a false ledger spine." A pause, thick as fog. Margaret's hands went cold. Edward spoke again, and this time even the distance could not soften the force of his words. "This is sealed." Mr. Crane's reply sounded strained. "It is old correspondence, estate matters, very dull." Edward's voice lowered, dangerous in its calm. "It bears my family crest." And in that moment, alone behind her locked door, Margaret felt the world tilt, as if the truth had finally found a way inside the house. Morning came without ceremony at Ashcroft. The manor simply began to move again, as if the night's questions could be brushed away with daylight. Margaret did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed until her back ached, listening to every step in the corridor. Twice she rose to check the latch. Twice she forced herself to sit again, because pacing felt too much like panic. When the first pale light slipped through the small window, she heard quiet knocking. "Miss Collins," a man's voice said, polite and measured. "It is Dr. Whitmore." Margaret's throat tightened. She had not expected him to come so promptly. She had not expected Edward to truly send for him. Behind the doctor's voice, Thomas Reed added, "It's all right. Open the door." Margaret's fingers fumbled at the latch. She opened it only a narrow width. Dr. Whitmore stood there with a medical bag in his hand, his coat buttoned properly, his expression serious without being severe. He was not young, not old either, the sort of man who had learned to keep his face steady in front of grief. "Good morning," he said gently. "May I come in?" Margaret stepped back and let him pass. Thomas hovered in the doorway like a guard who did not wish to appear like one. His eyes kept flicking down the corridor. Dr. Whitmore set his bag down. "His Highness asked that I examine you and speak to your condition. I will not treat you as a spectacle." Margaret's voice was thin. "That is kind." Dr. Whitmore shook his head once. "It is necessary." He asked simple questions first. How long she had been in the barn, what she ate, whether she had fevers in winter, whether she had ever been turned away when she asked for help. Margaret answered carefully, because she did not know how truth would be used. Still, the doctor did not interrupt. He did not scoff, he did not press for drama. He checked her hands, her wrists, the worn places on her skin, where cold and work had left their marks. He asked her to sit, then to stand, and listened to her breathing with a stethoscope, efficient and discreet. Thomas shifted in the doorway. "Is she—" Dr. Whitmore lifted a hand. "She is not about to faint, if that is your fear." Margaret's cheeks warmed with a strange embarrassment. She wanted to say she was stronger than they thought, but strength did not warm bones. Strength did not refill a body starved by years. Dr. Whitmore met her eyes. "You have endured long deprivation. That is clear. You also have a habit of holding yourself very still, as if movement might invite punishment." Margaret's throat tightened. She looked away. The doctor's voice remained calm. "I will state to His Highness that you are in need of proper food, warmth, and rest, and I will state plainly that your fear is not an act." Margaret's voice broke slightly. "He will listen to you. I believe he will," Dr. Whitmore replied. Thomas let out a slow breath, as if he had been holding it all night. Footsteps sounded in the corridor beyond Thomas, firm, controlled. Edward's voice reached them before he entered. "Doctor." Dr. Whitmore turned and bowed his head. "Your Highness?" Edward stepped into the doorway, then into the room, his presence filling it without noise. His coat was immaculate, but his eyes looked as if they had not slept. He glanced at Margaret first, and something in his face eased by a fraction when he saw her upright. "Miss Collins," he said. Margaret stood at once. "Your Highness?" Edward's gaze flicked to Dr. Whitmore. "Your assessment." Dr. Whitmore did not soften his words. "She has been underfed and exposed for a long period. She is exhausted. She is not deluded. She is frightened for sensible reasons." Edward's jaw tightened. "Thank you," Dr. Whitmore added. "If you wish to repair what has been done, You must first ensure she is not placed back under the power of those who caused her to fear. A quiet hush fell. Thomas looked at the floor. Margaret looked at the window. Edward looked at nothing for a moment, as if he were forcing himself to see something he had avoided for years. "I understand," Edward said at last. Dr. Whitmore closed his bag. "Shall I provide a written statement, Your Highness?" "Yes," Edward replied. "Today." Dr. Whitmore bowed again. "I will do so." Edward nodded toward the door. "Thomas, see the doctor out." Thomas obeyed, but he paused long enough to give Margaret a look that said, "Hold steady." When the door closed, the room felt smaller. Edward did not move closer. He did not try to comfort her with empty gentleness. He simply said, "You did well to stay." Margaret's mouth tightened. "I did not stay out of courage." Edward's gaze held hers. "Courage is not loud, Miss Collins. Sometimes it is remaining where you are when every instinct tells you to flee." Margaret's throat burned. She did not want him to speak like that. It made her feel seen in a way that was frightening. Edward's voice shifted back to business, as if he knew she needed it. "I found a letter last night." Margaret's hands went cold. "A letter. It was hidden among estate accounts," Edward said. "Sealed, with my family crest." Margaret stared. "Hidden by whom?" Edward's jaw tightened. "That is what I intend to determine." He drew a folded paper from the inside of his coat. "This is not the letter. This is a list of the records I demanded from Mr. Crane. He claims they are misplaced." Margaret's voice was flat. "They are not misplaced." Edward's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, they are not." He watched her for a moment, then asked, "Do you know what the letter might concern?" Margaret swallowed. "I do not know." Edward's gaze sharpened. "Did you ever see a letter sealed with the crest in Mr. Crane's hands?" Margaret hesitated. A memory rose. The steward's office door half open, Mr. Crane's voice low, Mrs. Blackwood's smooth reply, and a flash of red wax. "I saw something," she admitted carefully. Edward's posture tightened. "Tell me." Margaret's fingers curled. "It was years ago, not long before I was accused. I was sent to collect towels from the linen press near the steward's office. The door was ajar. I heard voices, Mrs. Blackwood and Mr. Crane. I did not linger. I only saw a letter, the seal, your crest." Edward's face went still. "And they saw you?" Margaret shook her head. "I do not think so." Edward's gaze held hers. "Yet soon after you were accused." Margaret's breath hitched. "Yes." Edward's voice lowered. "So the brooch may not have been the true matter at all." Margaret's stomach twisted. "Then why me?" Edward's eyes darkened with anger he was carefully containing. "Because you were convenient. Because you were powerless." Margaret's lips pressed together. She had known that. Hearing it spoken aloud made it sharper. Edward continued, "The letter bears my crest, but I did not write it." Margaret blinked. "How can you be certain?" Edward's mouth tightened. "Because I would remember authorizing correspondence sealed with my name and hidden like contraband." Margaret's voice was quiet. "Then someone used your name?" "Yes," Edward said, "and they hid it among accounts." Margaret's hands trembled. "What did it say?" Edward paused. "I have not opened it." Margaret stared. "You have not opened it." Edward's gaze remained steady. "If it is evidence, it must be handled properly. I will not allow Mr. Crane or Mrs. Blackwood to claim I forged it in anger." Margaret swallowed. "So you will show it to Lady Beatrice?" Edward's jaw tightened. "I will show it to anyone necessary." Margaret's voice dropped. "Then they will blame me for it." Edward's eyes sharpened. "They will try." Margaret's breath came fast. "Your Highness, you do not understand what it means for them to try." Edward took a slow breath. "Then tell me." Margaret's voice was raw. "It means they will say I tempted you to pity, that I lied, that I am unstable, that I want money, that I want to disgrace the household because I was dismissed." Edward's gaze hardened. "And what do you want?" Margaret's throat tightened. "I want to be left alone." Edward's expression changed, almost pained. "That is not justice." Margaret's laugh was brief and bitter. "Justice does not keep a person warm." Edward did not argue. He nodded slightly, as if accepting her truth without approving of it. Then he said, "You will remain in this room for now. You will eat." You will rest. No one will remove you from this manor without my permission. Margaret's stomach tightened. No one will remove me, she repeated, testing the words. Without your permission. Edward's voice was firm. Yes. Margaret's eyes stung. She turned her face slightly, unwilling to let tears rise. Edward added, if anyone troubles you, you will send for Thomas or you will send for me. Margaret's voice was very small. You are busy. Edward's mouth tightened. Yes. And you will leave, she said, unable to stop herself. You will be called away. Edward's gaze held hers. I will not be called away from this. Margaret wanted to believe him. She did not know how. Edward said quieter, You have lived 5 years as if you had no protector. That ends today. The word protector made Margaret's chest tighten in a way she did not like. It sounded like a cage dressed as kindness. Edward seemed to read something in her face because he added, Not as a master, as a man responsible for what happened under his roof. Margaret looked at him then, truly looked. He was not gentle in the way kind men were gentle. He was controlled, rigid. He looked like a person who had always believed order would prevent cruelty, and now he had discovered cruelty living inside order, like rot inside fruit. Edward turned toward the door. I must speak to Mr. Crane again. Margaret's throat tightened. Will you speak to Mrs. Blackwood? Edward paused. Yes. Margaret's hands clenched. Then she will come here. Edward's gaze sharpened. She will not. Margaret swallowed. She will try. Edward's voice turned cold. Let her. He left. Margaret sat slowly on the bed, her knees weak. The warmth of the room felt unreal, like a borrowed dress that might be ripped away the moment she moved. She forced herself to eat again. A few bites, a sip of water. Then she listened. The house was not silent. It never truly was. But it held a careful hush, the kind that came when servants feared to be caught saying the wrong thing. A while later, voices rose in the corridor, muffled but clear enough to catch words when they sharpened. Mrs. Blackwood's voice glided like a blade wrapped in velvet. Your Highness is putting the entire household into confusion. Edward's reply was low. Confusion is preferable to deceit. Mrs. Blackwood answered. Deceit is a strong accusation. Edward said, Then provide the dismissal papers. A pause. Mr. Crane's voice joined. Too smooth, too quick. Your Highness, we have explained the archives. Edward cut him off. You have explained nothing. Mrs. Blackwood's tone remained polite. His Highness is agitated. That is understandable. He returned to find a shocking circumstance, but this is not a matter to handle with haste. Edward's voice sharpened. It has already been handled with haste. 5 years ago. A hush followed that line. Margaret pressed her hands together. She imagined Mrs. Blackwood's smile tightening, her eyes narrowing in fury behind composure. Another voice appeared, crisp and controlled. Lady Beatrice. Edward, you are frightening the staff. Edward replied, They should be frightened of what they have allowed. Lady Beatrice's tone cooled. You speak as though the household has committed a crime. Edward's voice was very quiet. If a person is treated as nothing for 5 years, what would you call it? Lady Beatrice answered sharply. I would call it unfortunate. Edward responded. I would call it deliberate. Margaret's stomach twisted. Deliberate. That word again, bright and dangerous. Mrs. Blackwood spoke softly as if soothing. My lady, His Highness is under strain. He has always been tender-hearted. Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks at the insult hidden in those words. Tender-hearted as if truth were a weakness. Edward's voice turned like iron. Do not speak of my heart as if you know it. Silence. Then Lady Beatrice said, Edward, enough. You are letting a servant's story command you. Margaret's throat tightened. Edward replied, I am letting a human being's reality correct me. The corridor fell quiet again. Margaret sat very still, trying not to tremble. By midday, Thomas brought fresh water and bread. He slipped in and shut the door behind him. How are you? Margaret stared at him. Alive. Thomas gave a strained smile. That's a start. Margaret's voice shook. They are arguing. Thomas nodded. They are. Margaret whispered. Mrs. Blackwood will not forgive me. Thomas's smile faded. No. Margaret's hands tightened around the cup. She will find a way. Thomas leaned closer, voice low. She already is. Margaret's pulse jumped. What do you mean? Thomas hesitated, then said, I heard her speaking to Lady Beatrice in the morning room. She was saying, very sweetly, that you will bring scandal upon the house. Margaret's stomach turned. Scandal. Thomas nodded grimly. She says the staff will gossip, that your presence will unsettle the maids, that your story will invite questions from outsiders. Margaret's throat tightened, and Lady Beatrice listened. Thomas exhaled. Aye. She listened too well. Margaret's hands shook. I should go. Thomas's brows drew together. No. Margaret's voice rose, then fell again, frightened by her own volume. Thomas, this is how it ends. I am sent away. I am blamed for what they did. I become the stain. Thomas grabbed the edge of the tray as if steadying himself. His Highness will not allow it. Margaret stared at him. He cannot be everywhere. Thomas's face tightened. He is trying. Margaret's throat burned. Trying is not the same as stopping them. Thomas swallowed. No. He hesitated, then said, Mr. Crane arranged for His Highness to go to the Boundary Fields. Margaret blinked. To the fields. Thomas nodded. There is talk of a tenant dispute, a fence line, some nonsense that could wait if you ask me. Margaret's stomach went cold. When? Thomas looked uncomfortable. Soon. Margaret's hands clenched. So they will wait until he is gone. Thomas did not deny it. Margaret stood abruptly. I must leave first. Thomas stepped toward her, alarmed. Margaret, sit down. I will not be carried out like a parcel again, she hissed. Thomas's voice sharpened. And you will not run into the fog and starve yourself out of pride. Margaret's eyes stung. Pride is all I have left. Thomas softened his tone. No, you have truth. You have a prince who is furious. You have a doctor willing to speak. That is more than you had yesterday. Margaret's breath came fast. And when he is called away? Thomas swallowed. Then you stay behind the locked door, and you do not open it for anyone. Margaret stared at him. Not even Lady Beatrice. Thomas hesitated, then said, Not even her. Margaret's hands trembled. She could order you. Thomas's jaw tightened. She can order me to polish silver. She cannot order me to hand you over. Margaret stared at him. You would defy her. Thomas's face was grim. For you? Yes. Margaret's throat tightened. Why? Thomas looked away. Because I watched you disappear, and I did nothing that mattered. I won't do that again. Margaret swallowed hard. Thomas added, His Highness asked me to keep an eye on this corridor. Margaret's hands clenched. He expects trouble. Thomas gave a brief nod. Aye. Margaret whispered, What did he find? Thomas hesitated. He found enough to make Mr. Crane's face pale. Margaret's stomach turned. That letter. Thomas nodded. He has it secured. He said it will be shown to proper eyes. Margaret's chest tightened. Proper eyes will still blame me. Thomas shook his head. Not if His Highness stands firm. Margaret whispered. And if he is gone to the fields? Thomas's mouth tightened. Then you stand firm too. Margaret looked at the door latch. It seemed smaller than it had last night. Thomas left, and Margaret did as he told her. She locked the door. She sat down. She waited. The waiting was the worst. It was not like waiting in the barn where time moved with hunger and cold. This waiting was full of soft threats, hidden decisions, doors closing without her knowledge. Late afternoon brought more footsteps, more murmurs, then a knock. Margaret's heart jumped, a woman's voice sweet and careful. Margaret. Margaret froze. Lady Beatrice. Margaret did not answer. The voice continued, gentle as if speaking to a frightened child. Margaret, it is Lady Beatrice. I wish to speak with you. Margaret's throat tightened. She did not move. Margaret, Lady Beatrice said again, you need not be afraid. I want only what is best for you. Margaret's hands shook. Best for you. Those words had been spoken to her before, always just before something was taken. She remained silent. Lady Beatrice's tone turned slightly firmer. Open the door. Margaret stared at the latch. A second voice joined, smooth as ever. Mrs. Blackwood. My lady is only concerned, Mrs. Blackwood said. The girl is likely frightened and confused. Margaret's stomach dropped. Lady Beatrice replied, Margaret, you will open this door. Margaret's voice came out, thin but steady. "No, my lady." Silence. Mrs. Blackwood let out a small, pained sound. "There. You see, she is difficult." Lady Beatrice's voice sharpened. "Margaret Collins, you are in my house." Margaret swallowed. "I am in a room His Highness gave me." A pause. Then Lady Beatrice's tone cooled. "His Highness is occupied with matters of estate. He cannot be expected to manage every small disturbance." Margaret's chest tightened. "Then do not disturb me." Mrs. Blackwood's voice slid in, almost amused. "Margaret, you are in no position to speak so sharply to your betters." Margaret's hands clenched. "I am not speaking sharply. I am speaking clearly." Lady Beatrice drew a breath. "Margaret, I have decided that the best course is to remove you from this turmoil." Margaret's pulse leapt. "Remove me." Lady Beatrice said, "You will be taken to a charitable household in the next county, a respectable place, quiet. You will be cared for." Margaret's mouth went dry. "I did not ask for that." Lady Beatrice replied, "You are not thinking rationally. Your presence here is causing unrest." Margaret's voice trembled. "Unrest among those who forgot me for 5 years." Mrs. Blackwood's tone turned softly reproachful. "There is no need for such bitterness. My lady is offering mercy." Margaret's breath caught. "Mercy is not being sent away without choice." Lady Beatrice's voice sharpened. "You cannot stay here, Margaret. People will talk." Margaret whispered, "So you will hide me again." Silence. Then Mrs. Blackwood spoke, low and gentle. "Margaret, open the door. Do not make this unpleasant." The words made Margaret's skin prickle. Not because they promised harm, but because they promised control. Being carried by decisions she did not make. Being spoken about as if she were a troublesome object. Margaret's voice shook. "His Highness told me no one would remove me without his permission." Lady Beatrice replied, tight with offence. "Edward is not here." Margaret's hands clenched. "Then you will wait until he returns." Mrs. Blackwood's voice cooled by a degree. "You will not dictate to Lady Beatrice." Margaret swallowed hard. "I am not dictating, I am refusing." Lady Beatrice said, "Margaret, if you do not open the door, I will instruct the footman to bring the key." Margaret's stomach turned. She pictured a servant forced to obey. She pictured the latch turning. The room no longer hers. Her breath came fast. Then from down the corridor another set of footsteps approached quickly. Thomas's voice cut in, strained. "My lady!" Lady Beatrice snapped, "Thomas, step aside." Thomas answered, "His Highness said Miss Collins is not to be disturbed." Mrs. Blackwood's voice was sweet. "Thomas, do not place yourself in difficulty." Thomas replied, "I am already in it, ma'am." Margaret pressed her hand against her mouth. She could hear Thomas's fear beneath his defiance. Lady Beatrice's tone turned cold. "Thomas Reed, you will not defy me in my own house." Thomas said, "Then I will do what I must, my lady." Mrs. Blackwood's voice sharpened slightly. "And what is that?" Thomas answered, "Send for His Highness." A pause. Lady Beatrice's voice became very quiet. "He is at the Boundary Fields. He will not return soon." Margaret's stomach dropped. So it was true. Edward had been drawn away. Mrs. Blackwood spoke, soft and steady. "Then we must act sensibly." Lady Beatrice replied, "Yes, we must." Margaret's hands shook. She looked around the small room as if it might offer a hiding place. There was none. She heard metal shift, the sound of keys. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. Then Thomas's voice rose, urgent. "My lady, please." Lady Beatrice replied, "Thomas, do not force my hand." Mrs. Blackwood added, with the gentlest menace, "Open the door, Margaret. You will only make it harder." Margaret's throat burned. Harder for whom, she wanted to ask, for her or for them? She backed away from the door, trembling. The key scraped against the lock. Margaret squeezed her eyes shut. Then, abruptly, the scraping stopped. Thomas's voice was low and fierce. "No." Lady Beatrice snapped, "Thomas!" Thomas said, "If you insist on this, my lady, you must do it yourself. I will not be the one to turn the key." Silence fell like a curtain. Margaret pressed her fist to her mouth, shaking. Lady Beatrice's voice came again, clipped and restrained. "Very well." Footsteps shifted. The key entered the lock again, this time with a steadier, more practiced hand. Margaret's breath caught. The latch turned. The door opened. Margaret stood rigid, her bundle clutched against her chest as if it could protect her. Lady Beatrice entered first, face pale with controlled resolve. Mrs. Blackwood followed behind her, composed and watchful, and two servants stood in the hall, eyes lowered, pretending not to see. Lady Beatrice looked at Margaret as one might look at a problem one intends to solve efficiently. "Margaret, you will come with us." Margaret's voice was hoarse. "I will not." Lady Beatrice's jaw tightened. "You cannot remain here." Margaret's eyes flashed. "You mean you will not allow it?" Mrs. Blackwood sighed softly. "This is why we did not wish to indulge her, my lady." Lady Beatrice did not look at Mrs. Blackwood. She kept her gaze on Margaret. "You will go to a respectable house. Quietly, you will be cared for and kept from speaking," Margaret said, and the words came out raw. Lady Beatrice's lips pressed together. "From scandal." Margaret's hands trembled. "You are not protecting me. You are protecting the name." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. "That name shelters you whether you appreciate it or not." Margaret's throat burned. "It did not shelter me in the barn." Mrs. Blackwood's voice turned gentle, as if coaxing. "Margaret, you have had a hard life. We all understand. But you must not mistake His Highness's momentary concern for an invitation to remain." Margaret stared at her. "Momentary?" Mrs. Blackwood smiled faintly. "His Highness is a busy man." Margaret's breath came fast. "He told me—" Lady Beatrice cut in. "Edward is young, impulsive. He does not fully grasp the consequences of dragging household matters into daylight." Margaret's mouth went dry. "So you will drag me out of sight?" Lady Beatrice's voice was final. "Yes?" Mrs. Blackwood gestured lightly. "The carriage is waiting." Margaret's chest tightened. "Carriage?" Lady Beatrice said, "You will go now, before the servants invent their own stories." Margaret looked toward the hall. The two servants kept their eyes down, but their faces held tight fear. Not of Margaret, of being caught between Lady Beatrice and the prince. Thomas stood farther down the corridor, fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight, eyes burning with helplessness. Margaret's throat tightened. "Thomas." Thomas swallowed. "Margaret." "I tried." Lady Beatrice turned sharply. "Thomas, return to your duties." Thomas did not move. Mrs. Blackwood's voice was sweet. "Thomas, be sensible." Thomas's voice was strained. "My lady, if His Highness returns—" Lady Beatrice's reply was cold. "He will thank me for preventing disgrace." Margaret's hands shook. "I have done nothing disgraceful." Lady Beatrice's eyes were hard. "Your existence in this house at this moment is enough." The words struck Margaret with a quiet cruelty that left her breathless. Mrs. Blackwood's tone softened, almost kind. "Come now. Take your things. You may write a note to His Highness if you insist." Margaret stared. A note. As if she could fold 5 years into ink. Lady Beatrice turned toward the hall. "Bring the shawl. She will need it." One of the servants hurried away. Margaret's heart hammered. She looked at the open door. She could run past them down the back stairs, out into the yard. But where would she go? The barn, the road. Back to the same hiding place, only now they would watch it. "Mrs. Blackwood stepped closer, voice low enough that only Margaret could hear. "Do not make them carry you, Margaret. It will only confirm what they already think." Margaret's eyes snapped to hers. "Carry me." Mrs. Blackwood's smile did not reach her eyes. "Figuratively, of course, there is no need for unpleasantness." Lady Beatrice turned back, impatience tightening her face. "Margaret." Now, Margaret's breath came in shallow pulls. She looked at the small bed, the basin, the tray of food. A taste of safety, offered and revoked in the same day. Her hands tightened around her bundle. "If I go," she said, voice shaking, "I will not come back." Mrs. Blackwood smiled faintly. "That is the intention." Lady Beatrice snapped, "Mrs. Blackwood." Mrs. Blackwood bowed her head, polite as ever. "Forgive me, my lady." Margaret's stomach twisted. She looked at Thomas again. Thomas's eyes were wet with frustration. "I am sorry," he mouthed. Margaret swallowed hard. She lifted her chin, forcing herself not to crumble in front of them. "Very well," she said, though every part of her screamed. "I will go." Lady Beatrice exhaled, as if relieved. "Good. That is wise." Mrs. Blackwood stepped back and motioned toward the hall. "This way." Margaret walked out, bundle held tight, spine straight, face composed because she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. They led her down the back stairs, not the main, as if even her departure must be hidden from the better carpets. The servants who passed pretended not to look, yet Margaret felt every glance. Outside, the air was damp and pale. The drive lay ahead, and a modest carriage waited near the side gate, not the grand one. The driver sat stiffly, eyes forward. A maid handed Margaret a shawl without meeting her eyes. Lady Beatrice said, "You will be taken to Mrs. Harrow's house. She is a respectable widow who oversees girls in need of guidance. You will be safe there." Margaret's mouth tightened. Guidance. A gentler word for being watched. Mrs. Blackwood added, "You will have a bed, food, quiet. You should be grateful." Margaret did not answer. Gratitude had been demanded of her too many times by those who had stolen from her first. Thomas stepped forward suddenly, voice urgent. "My lady, at least let her leave a note for His Highness." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "That is unnecessary." Margaret's throat tightened. "I will write it." Mrs. Blackwood tilted her head. "Write what you wish. His Highness will read it when he returns. If he has time." Margaret's hands shook as a pencil and a small sheet of paper were pressed into them. The paper was too clean, too bright. She stood by the carriage step, trying to form words that would not sound like pleading, words that would not be used against her. She wrote quickly, her handwriting small and tight. "Your Highness, they have decided I must go. I did not choose this. I did not wish to cause disorder. I only wished to live without fear." Her fingers trembled. She added one more line because she could not stop herself. "If you meant what you said, remember me." She folded the note and held it out to Thomas because she did not trust Mrs. Blackwood with it. Thomas took it as if it were something precious and dangerous. "I will give it to him," he whispered. Lady Beatrice's voice snapped. "Enough." Into the carriage. Margaret climbed in. The seat was upholstered, soft. It felt like an insult after straw. Mrs. Blackwood leaned closer to the carriage door, her voice a quiet murmur meant only for Margaret. "Do be sensible now. Do not imagine His Highness will overturn his own household for you." Margaret stared at her, and her voice came out calm, which surprised her. "You are afraid he will." Mrs. Blackwood's smile sharpened. "I am afraid of disorder." Margaret whispered, "No, you are afraid of truth." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes hardened. "Close the door." The door shut. Margaret's breath hitched. She clutched her folded note in her lap for a moment, then realized she had handed it away. Her hands were empty now. Outside, Lady Beatrice spoke to the driver. "Go." The carriage jolted forward. Margaret pressed her palm against the window glass, watching the manor recede through mist. She looked for Edward. She knew she would not see him. He was gone to the boundary fields, chasing a dispute that suddenly felt less like accident and more like trap. The carriage wheels rolled steadily over the drive, and Margaret's throat tightened as she realized the house that had erased her was now erasing her again, only this time with polite words and a respectable destination. And then, through the thinning fog ahead, she saw a rider in the distance, horse moving fast toward the estate, posture rigid with urgency, and even without seeing his face clearly, she knew it was Edward returning too late, as the carriage carried her away, with his unread note sealed in her trembling hands. The carriage had not gone far, when the driver reined in so abruptly that Margaret's breath caught. The wheels stopped. The horses stamped impatiently. Outside, a voice rang out, controlled but unmistakable. "Open the door," Lady Beatrice's voice followed, sharp with offense. "Edward, you cannot—" "I said, open the door." Margaret's fingers tightened around her shawl. Her heart hammered as if it remembered the barn and mist and hiding. She leaned toward the window, but saw only blurred shapes and the edge of a riding cloak. The carriage door opened. Prince Edward stood there, hair slightly wind-tossed, eyes steady and cold with restrained fury. He did not look at Margaret first. He looked past her, toward the drive and the manor, as if he were already weighing consequences. Then his gaze met hers. "Miss Collins," he said, voice lower now. "Are you well?" Margaret tried to speak, Her throat refused. She managed, "I am here." Edward nodded once, as if that was enough proof of everything that had been done. He turned his head slightly, addressing someone out of frame. "Who ordered this?" Lady Beatrice stepped into view beside the open door, gloved hands clenched, posture perfect. Mrs. Blackwood stood half a pace behind her, composed as ever, mouth set in a faint expression of concern. Mr. Crane hovered near the driver, looking as if he wished to melt into the fog. Lady Beatrice lifted her chin. "I did." Edward's voice did not rise. "On what authority?" Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. "On mine. As the head of this household in your absence." Edward's jaw tightened. "I was absent for hours, not years." Lady Beatrice's tone sharpened. "Edward, you are emotional. You are letting a servant's tale unsettle the estate. This is the sensible course. Quiet, proper." Margaret's chest tightened. Quiet, proper. The same words that had locked her into straw and silence. Edward's gaze hardened. Proper would have been paying her wages. Proper would have been giving her a dismissal paper. Proper would have been letting her leave with her name intact. Lady Beatrice's lips pressed together. And scandal would have been avoided if she had not stayed on the grounds. Margaret's voice came out before she could stop it, thin but clear. "I stayed because you left me nothing else." Lady Beatrice's eyes snapped to her. "You are not to address me in that tone." Edward's head turned immediately. "She will address you in whatever tone the truth requires." Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, voice smooth. "Your Highness, no one wishes to harm the girl. My lady arranged for her comfort. A respectable widow will—" Edward cut in. "You will not speak for my aunt, and you will not speak of comfort as though you have ever provided it." Mrs. Blackwood's smile stayed in place. "Your Highness is mistaken if he believes—" Edward's gaze was ice. "Enough." A hush fell. Even the horses seemed to stand more still. Edward looked at Margaret again, his voice softened by a degree, though his posture remained rigid. "Did you choose to leave?" Margaret swallowed. "No." Edward nodded, as if that single word had settled the last doubt. He extended his hand, not into the carriage but near the door, offering assistance without assuming she would take it. Margaret stared at his hand. She did not want to be seen clinging to him. She did not want Mrs. Blackwood to smile at the sight. Yet her legs felt unsteady, and the carriage step seemed suddenly too high. She placed her hand lightly in his. His grip was steady, respectful, and brief. He helped her down without pulling her close. When her feet met the ground, she tried to release him at once, but he kept his hand only long enough to ensure she did not stumble. Then he turned, facing Lady Beatrice fully. "This ends," he said. Lady Beatrice's voice trembled with contained anger. "You are making a spectacle." Edward's reply was quiet. "No, I am ending one." He gestured toward the driver. "Return the carriage to the yard." The driver hesitated, eyes flicking to Lady Beatrice. Edward's voice sharpened. "Now!" The driver bowed his head quickly. "Yes, Your Highness." Lady Beatrice stepped closer. "Edward, listen to me. The household is a machine. It runs on order. If you dismantle it for one girl—" "One girl," Edward repeated, and the words sounded like a condemnation. Lady Beatrice's mouth tightened. "The servant, a former servant, and you are a prince." Edward's gaze did not waver. "A prince is not a decoration. A prince is responsibility." Mrs. Blackwood sighed softly. "This is very noble, Your Highness. But noblesse oblige does not mean—" Edward turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Do not teach me duty, Mrs. Blackwood." Mr. Crane cleared his throat, trying to sound helpful. "Your Highness, perhaps we should return to the manor and speak calmly." "We will," Edward said. "In the library, with witnesses." Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. "Witnesses?" Edward's jaw tightened. "Yes." Margaret's stomach turned. Witnesses meant voices. Voices meant stories. Stories meant the world. Edward looked at Margaret again. "You will walk back with me." Margaret's voice was small. "They will stare." Edward's tone was firm. "Let them." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes flickered, displeasure hidden behind calm. "Your Highness is determined to humiliate the household." Edward's gaze sharpened. "You have humiliated it yourself. I am only turning on the lamps." They walked back up the drive. Margaret kept her eyes lowered, but she felt every window that might hold a watching face. She felt every servant who might be lingering near hedges or paths, pretending to tend a shrub while listening. Edward did not rush her. He did not speak much. Yet his presence beside her was like a shield that did not touch. At the manor steps, Lady Beatrice blocked their path for a moment. "Edward," she said, voice low as if pleading for him to remember his upbringing, "think carefully. If you insist on this, there will be consequences." Edward did not blink. "Yes." Lady Beatrice's eyes searched his face. "You are prepared to be questioned." Edward's reply was immediate. "I am prepared to answer," Mrs. Blackwood murmured. "How very dramatic." Edward did not look at her. "Thomas," he called. Thomas appeared at once, breathless, as if he had been waiting to be summoned all day. "For your Highness," Thomas said, bowing. Edward said, "Bring Dr. Whitmore and ask Reverend Hale to attend in the library, and send for Mr. Pembroke, the magistrate's clerk, if he is available. I want a record made." Lady Beatrice inhaled sharply. "Edward, no." Edward's gaze was unwavering. "Yes." Thomas's eyes widened, then his face tightened with resolve. "At once, Your Highness." Edward turned to Margaret. "You will sit in the library. You will not stand as though on trial." Margaret's throat tightened. "I do not wish to be the cause," Edward cut in softly. "You are not the cause, you are the consequence." Margaret swallowed hard. Consequence, a word that felt heavy and strange in her mouth. In the library, Edward ensured a chair was placed for her near the hearth, not too close to him, not too far, as if he were mindful of the way proximity could become another kind of rumour. Mrs. Blackwood and Mr. Crane stood near the desk. Lady Beatrice remained upright, hands clasped, face set. Edward took the sealed letter from an inner pocket and placed it on the desk where all could see it. He did not open it. He did not dramatize it. He simply set it down as one sets down a truth too solid to be denied. Dr. Whitmore arrived first, bowing to Edward and nodding once to Margaret with quiet professionalism. Reverend Hale followed, a man with kind eyes and a careful manner. He looked uncomfortable, as if he sensed he had been pulled into something that could not remain private. Then came Mr. Pembroke's clerk, young and neat, with ink and paper ready. He bowed quickly, eyes darting to the room's tension. Edward spoke to the clerk first. "You will record this inquiry. It is not a court proceeding, but it will be treated with seriousness." The clerk swallowed and nodded. "Yes, Your Highness." Lady Beatrice's voice cut in. "Edward, you are making an enemy of society." Edward's gaze remained on the letter. "Then society can explain itself to my conscience." Mrs. Blackwood smiled faintly. "Conscience is admirable. It is not always practical." Edward looked at her for the first time since entering, and his eyes were a chill that made even Mrs. Blackwood's composure flicker. "Mrs. Blackwood," Edward said, "state your position in this household." Mrs. Blackwood lifted her chin. "Housekeeper, responsible for the staff," Edward said, "and the welfare of those under your management." Mrs. Blackwood's smile tightened. "Yes." Edward's voice remained calm. "Did you know Margaret Collins was sleeping in the barn?" Mrs. Blackwood's gaze did not flinch. "I knew she had taken to wandering the grounds after dismissal. We discouraged it." Margaret's breath caught. Discouraged it, as if she had been a stray cat. Edward's eyes narrowed. "Did you know where she slept?" Mrs. Blackwood's tone was careful. "I did not supervise her sleep, Your Highness. She was not employed." Edward leaned slightly forward. "Did you ever instruct a servant to leave food outside for her?" Mrs. Blackwood's eyes flicked, just once to Thomas, then back. "I did not." Edward turned to Thomas. "Thomas Reed." Thomas stepped forward, jaw tight. "Yes, Your Highness." Edward's voice was steady. "Have you left food for Miss Collins?" Thomas swallowed. "Yes." Mrs. Blackwood's voice softened, almost pleased. "There, you see. The staff took pity. We were not cruel." Thomas's face reddened. "I took pity because no one else would." Lady Beatrice snapped. "Thomas, mind yourself." Edward's voice cut in, sharper. "Thomas will speak honestly. That is what is happening now." He looked at Thomas. "Why did you leave food?" Thomas's voice shook slightly, but he held himself steady. "Because I saw her once in winter, Your Highness. She was thin as a shadow. I thought she would not last. I asked Mrs. Blackwood if we might bring her in." Mrs. Blackwood's smile held. "And I said what any sensible housekeeper would say, that a dismissed servant cannot be permitted to live among us. Thomas's eyes burned. She said it would invite trouble. Edward's gaze locked on Mrs. Blackwood. Did you say it would invite trouble, or did you say it would invite questions? Mrs. Blackwood's smile became delicate. Those are much the same, in a household. Edward's voice cooled. Not to a conscience. He turned to Mr. Crane. Mr. Silas Crane, state your position. Mr. Crane cleared his throat. Estate steward, Your Highness. Edward said, You manage wages and records. Mr. Crane nodded quickly. Yes. Edward's tone was precise. Produce Miss Collins's dismissal papers. Mr. Crane's face tightened. As I explained, the archives... Edward held up a hand. Answer the question. Do you have them? Mr. Crane swallowed. Not at present. Edward's eyes narrowed. Do you have her wage records for the months preceding dismissal? Mr. Crane hesitated. There were deductions, Edward interrupted. Do you have them? Mr. Crane's voice was strained. I have partial entries. Edward's gaze sharpened. Partial is another word for altered. Mr. Crane flushed. Your Highness, I would never... Edward's voice remained calm. Then you will not object to your ledgers being reviewed by an outside auditor. Lady Beatrice's head snapped up. Edward, that is absurd. Edward looked at her. It is necessary. Mrs. Blackwood's tone turned gently scandalized. Your Highness intends to parade our accounts before strangers because of one girl's bitterness? Margaret's hands clenched. She forced herself to speak, even though her voice trembled. It is not bitterness, she said. It is truth. Mrs. Blackwood turned toward her with polite contempt. My dear, truth is often a matter of perspective. Edward's voice cut through, cold and final. You will not call her my dear. Mrs. Blackwood's smile faltered for the first time. Your Highness. Edward did not soften. You will address her as Miss Collins. A quiet hush fell again. Edward turned to Dr. Whitmore. Doctor, state your findings. Dr. Whitmore's voice was steady and professional. Miss Collins has suffered long underfeeding and exposure. She is exhausted. Her fear is consistent with prolonged neglect and intimidation. I see no signs of delusion or deceit. Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened. Intimidation. Dr. Whitmore did not flinch. Yes, my lady. Mrs. Blackwood's voice was careful. Doctor, you are interpreting emotion. Dr. Whitmore's gaze remained level. I am interpreting evidence. Edward nodded once. He turned to Reverend Hale. Reverend, you have known this household for years. Have you ever been informed that a dismissed servant remained on the estate without support? Reverend Hale's face was troubled. No, Your Highness. Never. Edward's voice stayed calm. Would you have considered it acceptable? Reverend Hale swallowed. No. Lady Beatrice's voice cut in, brittle. This is becoming a sermon. Edward replied. It is becoming a reckoning. He placed his hand near the sealed letter without touching the wax. Now the letter. Mr. Crane's eyes darted. Your Highness, that letter is old. Edward's gaze was sharp. If it is harmless, you will not object to it being opened in front of witnesses. Mrs. Blackwood's smile returned, faint and tight. Open it then. Let it be dull. Edward looked at the clerk. Record that I am opening this letter in the presence of witnesses. The clerk nodded quickly, pen scratching. Edward broke the seal carefully and unfolded the paper. Margaret's chest tightened. She watched his eyes move across the page. She watched his jaw tighten, then harden. He did not explode. That frightened her more. Lady Beatrice stepped closer, trying to see. Edward? Edward lifted the paper slightly away from her. His voice was quiet and controlled. This is a request for funds, he said. In my name, directed to a private account. Mr. Crane's face drained of color. Your Highness, that must be a mistake. Edward's gaze snapped to him. It is signed with my title. Mrs. Blackwood's voice remained smooth, but her eyes were sharp with calculation. For what purpose? Edward's lips tightened. To cover a discrepancy in the steward's books. A discrepancy that would have drawn attention if not corrected. Mr. Crane swallowed hard. Your Highness, I can explain... Edward's voice cut through. You will. Lady Beatrice's face went pale. Edward, do not say this aloud. Edward turned to her, eyes steady. It is already written. He looked at the clerk. Record that this letter implicates the steward in misusing the family crest to conceal account irregularities. The clerk's pen hesitated, then moved. Mr. Crane's voice rose, strained. Your Highness, you cannot ruin me on the word of a paper I did not write. Edward's gaze was ice. Then you will welcome investigation. Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, tone soothing. Your Highness, if Mr. Crane made errors, that is one matter. But it has nothing to do with Margaret Collins. Edward's gaze shifted to her. It has everything to do with Miss Collins. Mrs. Blackwood's smile thinned. How so? Edward's voice was calm. She saw the crest. She heard voices. Soon after, she was accused of theft and removed from the house without proper record. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. Lady Beatrice's breath hitched. Edward turned to Margaret. Miss Collins, did you ever see Lady Beatrice's brooch after it was said to be missing? Margaret's throat tightened. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. I saw it once. Lady Beatrice stiffened. You saw it? Margaret nodded. On Mrs. Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Absurd. Margaret's voice shook, but she held herself. It was pinned under her collar at a servant's supper. I recognized it because I had polished it before. The stone catches light a certain way. Lady Beatrice's face tightened, disbelief and fury warring. Mrs. Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood's tone stayed polite. My lady, that is nonsense. Edward's gaze did not waver. Then you will not object to your personal drawer being examined. Mrs. Blackwood's smile finally cracked. Your Highness, you cannot search a lady's belongings. Edward's reply was immediate. You are not a lady, you are an employee. A sharp hush fell. Mrs. Blackwood's cheeks reddened, but her posture remained upright. How dare... Edward's voice stayed cold. How dare you? Lady Beatrice's voice trembled. Edward, stop! Edward looked at her, and his tone softened by the smallest degree. Aunt, if you want the name protected, you must let the rot be cut away. Lady Beatrice's eyes shimmered with mortification. This is humiliating. Edward answered quietly. It should be. Thomas moved at Edward's nod and returned moments later with a small tray holding items gathered under Lady Beatrice's reluctant permission. A brooch box opened and empty. Mrs. Blackwood's face went rigid. Edward did not gloat. He simply said, Mrs. Blackwood, where is the brooch? Mrs. Blackwood's voice was tight. I do not know. Edward's gaze was unwavering. Then you will explain why a servant you dismissed for stealing it lived on the estate without wages, while the brooch remained unaccounted for. Mrs. Blackwood's mouth opened, then closed. Lady Beatrice's voice shook. Agnes, tell me the truth. Mrs. Blackwood's composure trembled at last. My lady, Edward's voice cut in. No, you will speak to the record. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes flashed with anger, then something like panic. If I kept it, it was to safeguard it from the girl. She was near your chambers. She was suspicious. Margaret's stomach turned. Even now Mrs. Blackwood tried to make herself a guardian. Edward's gaze was cold. You kept it to have leverage. Mr. Crane's voice rose, desperate. Your Highness, you are drawing conclusions. Edward looked at him. And you are running out of places to hide. Lady Beatrice sank onto a chair, face pale. This is impossible. Edward's voice was controlled, but it softened when he addressed her. Aunt Beatrice, you did not take the brooch. You were wronged too. Lady Beatrice's eyes lifted, shocked by the tenderness in that statement. Edward continued, but your fear of scandal has protected the wrong people. Lady Beatrice's lips trembled. Edward, I only wanted to keep the household respectable. Edward replied, respectable without compassion is merely polished cruelty. The words made Margaret's throat tighten. She looked down quickly, because if she looked at him too long, something inside her would break open. Edward faced Mrs. Blackwood and Mr. Crane. You are dismissed from your positions effective immediately. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes widened. Your Highness, you cannot— I can, Edward said. And I will, Mr. Crane stammered. Your Highness, think of the estate's stability. Edward's voice was final. The estate will be stable when it is honest. He looked at the clerk. Record their dismissal pending further review and restitution. The clerk's pen scratched quickly. Edward added, Reverend Hale, I ask that you oversee temporary arrangements for household management. Thomas Reed will assist until a proper steward is appointed. Thomas blinked, stunned. Your Highness, Edward's gaze held his, you have shown integrity. That matters. Thomas swallowed hard. Yes, Your Highness. Lady Beatrice's voice was small. Edward, this will be spoken of. Edward nodded once. Yes. Mrs. Blackwood's face tightened into something bitter. And what of the girl? Will you elevate her above all? Edward turned to Margaret then, and his voice became quieter. Miss Collins will receive what she is owed. Margaret's breath caught. Edward continued. Her wages will be calculated from the date of wrongful withholding. She will receive a written reference stating she served with diligence and was dismissed without proof. Her name will be cleared in this household. Margaret's throat burned. Cleared. The word felt unreal. Lady Beatrice looked at Margaret, and for the first time her gaze held something other than disdain. It held shame. Lady Beatrice began, then stopped, as if apology were a language she had never had to speak. Edward did not force her. He simply said, Aunt, you will also provide a statement acknowledging the accusation was never proven. Lady Beatrice swallowed. Yes. Mrs. Blackwood's voice snapped. My lady! Edward's gaze cut through her. Leave the room. Mrs. Blackwood's jaw clenched. Mr. Crane's shoulders sagged. They left under Edward's steady stare, their footsteps too quick for dignity. When the door shut, the air changed. Reverend Hale cleared his throat gently. Your Highness, I will do what you ask. Edward nodded. Thank you. Dr. Whitmore said, I will prepare the written statement by evening. Edward nodded again. Thank you, Doctor. The clerk gathered his paper with shaking hands, bowed and left as well. Thomas remained near the door as if afraid to go. Lady Beatrice stood slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. Edward, I did not know. Edward's voice softened slightly. You should have asked. Lady Beatrice's face tightened. I thought order was kindness. Edward replied, Order without listening is vanity. Lady Beatrice pressed her lips together, then looked at Margaret, as if seeing her properly for the first time. Her voice was stiff but quieter. Miss Collins, I am sorry. Margaret's throat tightened. The apology did not erase 5 years, but it was the first crack in the wall that had held her outside. Margaret managed, Thank you, my lady. Lady Beatrice looked away as if she could not bear her own discomfort. Edward, I will do what you require. She left, shoulders stiff, dignity wounded but not destroyed. When they were alone, except for Thomas lingering outside, Edward turned fully to Margaret. He did not smile. He did not soften into romance. His face held that same stern restraint. Yet his eyes were different, less distant, more human. It is done, he said. Margaret's voice barely held. Is it? Edward nodded. The lies are exposed. The positions are ended. The record is made. Margaret's hands trembled. And what happens to me? Edward took a slow breath. You choose. Margaret's throat tightened. Choose what? Edward's voice was careful. If you wish to leave Ashcroft with wages and reference, you may. If you wish to remain until you recover, you may. If you wish to go to your father with support and without shame, you may. Margaret stared at him. Choices felt dangerous. Choices meant hope. Her voice came out small. If I go, they will say I was paid to be silent. Edward's jaw tightened. Then I will speak for you. Margaret's eyes stung. People will not listen. Edward stepped a fraction closer, still leaving space, still respecting the boundaries her fear had built. They will listen to me, he said, and if they do not, then they will hear me again. Margaret swallowed. Why? Edward's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. Because I was proud of a household I did not truly know. Because I lived in comfort while you lived in exile a few steps away. And because I cannot respect myself if I do nothing beyond paperwork. Margaret's voice trembled. Paperwork is more than I ever had. Edward nodded once. And it is not enough. Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of everything neither knew how to say without risking misunderstanding. Margaret forced herself to ask, What do you intend, Your Highness? Edward's eyes softened slightly, and that softness was more unnerving than his anger had been. I intend to repair what I can, he said. Publicly, Properly. Margaret's mouth tightened. Properly. Edward's voice was quiet. Yes, in a way society cannot dismiss as a passing whim. Margaret's breath caught. She had heard that tone before, the one that meant he had decided something he would not abandon. Edward continued, "If you leave with money, they will whisper. If you remain as a servant, they will whisper. If I merely protect you from a distance, they will whisper." Margaret's hands clenched. "They will whisper regardless." Edward nodded. "Yes." Then he said very calmly, "So I will give them something better to talk about." Margaret's heart hammered. "What does that mean?" Edward's voice did not waver. "It means I will formally court you." Margaret stared, breathless. "Court me," Edward nodded once. "Not as a scandal, not as a secret, as an honorable intention." Margaret's mind spun. Courtship meant 1,000 eyes. It meant scrutiny. It meant whispers that could become knives without ever drawing blood. Her voice came out hoarse. "Why would you do that?" Edward's gaze held hers. "Because you deserve your name back without hiding. Because I will not let you be treated as a shameful problem that must be moved quietly from one place to another. And because I find that when you speak, I hear a courage I have rarely encountered in rooms full of titled people." Margaret's throat tightened dangerously. She looked down, because her eyes were betraying her. Edward added softer, "I will not hurry you. I will not demand gratitude. I will not demand anything, but I will offer you a future that does not end with you disappearing again." Margaret's breath shook. "You do not know me." Edward's voice was gentle, but still firm. "Then I will know you." She lifted her eyes slowly. "And if I refuse?" Edward nodded. "Then I will still ensure you are protected and restored. The offer is not a chain." Margaret's hands trembled. She forced herself to speak the fear that had haunted her since the barn. "And if you tire of this," she whispered, "if you wake one morning and decide it was too much trouble?" Edward's gaze did not move. "Then you will have your wages, your reference, your cleared name, and witnesses who can never unsee what they saw today." Margaret's throat tightened. "You planned even for your own failure." Edward's mouth tightened into something almost like regret. "I planned for reality." Silence again. Margaret looked around the library at the books she had once dusted without being allowed to read. She thought of the barn, the straw, the counting of winters. She thought of being called no one. She looked back at Edward. Her voice was quiet and careful. "If you court me, it must be with respect." Edward nodded. "Always." "And you will not let them speak of me as though I trapped you," she said, the words trembling. "I will not be the story that makes you a fool." Edward's eyes sharpened, offended on her behalf. "No one will call you that." Margaret swallowed. "They will try." Edward's voice was steady. "Then they will fail." She hesitated, then said, "Very well." The words left her like a small surrender and a fierce choice at the same time. Edward exhaled slowly, as if something in him unclenched. He did not reach for her. He did not claim her. He only bowed his head slightly, a gesture that was both princely and personal. "Thank you," he said. Margaret's voice was faint. "Do not thank me yet." Edward's gaze held hers, and for the first time there was something like warmth beneath his restraint. "I will not waste what you have entrusted," he said. "Not again." Margaret nodded once, and the nod felt like stepping out of the barn into a world that would finally be forced to see her. The house did not become gentle overnight. It became watchful. Margaret felt it in every pause in a corridor, in every maid who curtsied too quickly, in every servant who lowered their eyes as if her face might burn them. The manor had always known how to be silent. Now it learned how to be silent around her in a different way. 2 days after the inquiry, Dr. Whitmore returned with his written statement. Edward received it in the library with the same careful seriousness he had shown when he broke the seal of the letter. He read every line. Then he handed it to the clerk, who copied it into the record. Margaret stood near the window, hands clasped, trying to remain a person and not a document. Edward turned to her. "You will keep a copy." Margaret blinked. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "Not Thomas. Not Reverend Hale. Not my aunt. You." Her throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you should never again have to depend on someone's memory of your truth," Edward replied. She took the paper with hands that trembled. The words looked too formal to belong to her life. Yet they did. Her name was there, her condition stated plainly, her fear acknowledged as reasonable. Behind them the clerk murmured, "Signed and witnessed, Your Highness." Edward answered, "Good." Lady Beatrice arrived just as the clerk finished. She paused in the doorway, as if the room itself held a force she did not want to meet. Edward looked up. "Aunt." Lady Beatrice entered slowly, gloved hands clasped. She had always carried herself like a rule. Today, she carried herself like a person trying to learn. Her gaze went to Margaret, then away, then back again. "Miss Collins," Lady Beatrice said stiffly. Margaret inclined her head. "My lady." Lady Beatrice swallowed. "I have brought the statement you requested." Edward's eyes did not soften. "Then let us hear it." Lady Beatrice's chin lifted. "I have written that the accusation against you was never proven, that the brooch was not found in your possession, that you were dismissed without sufficient inquiry." Margaret's breath caught. Lady Beatrice held out the paper toward Edward, but he did not take it. He looked at Margaret instead. "Take it." Margaret hesitated. Lady Beatrice's fingers trembled slightly as she extended it further. "Please." Margaret took the paper, and for a second their hands brushed. Lady Beatrice flinched, not from disgust but from shame. Margaret's voice was quiet. "Thank you, my lady." Lady Beatrice's eyes shimmered with discomfort. "You have no reason to thank me." Margaret's mouth tightened. "It is still something I did not have yesterday." Lady Beatrice looked at Edward as if searching for rescue from this conversation. Edward did not rescue her. He only said, "Aunt, there is also the matter of wages." Lady Beatrice's face tightened. "Yes, I understand." Edward's voice was steady. "Do you?" Lady Beatrice drew a careful breath. "Edward, I have always believed myself a decent woman." Edward's eyes held hers. "Decency that does not look down the back stairs is not decency. It is comfort." Lady Beatrice's lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes flicked to Margaret. "Miss Collins," she said, voice low, "I did not know you were there. If I had—" Margaret answered gently, because she would not let bitterness govern her now. "My lady, if you had wanted to know, you would have asked." Lady Beatrice flinched as if struck, then nodded once. "Yes." She turned to Edward. "You have made your point." Edward replied, "I did not make it. She lived it." Lady Beatrice's shoulders sagged a fraction. "What happens now?" Edward said. "Now we act as though honor matters more than convenience." Lady Beatrice whispered, "And society?" Edward's gaze was calm. "Society can gossip itself hoarse." Lady Beatrice looked down, then back up. "Edward, you truly mean to court her?" Edward did not hesitate. "Yes." Lady Beatrice's voice tightened. "People will say you are doing it to prove something." Edward replied, "Then they will finally be correct about me. I am proving that the title on my name is not an excuse to ignore suffering." Lady Beatrice's eyes filled, but she blinked it away quickly. "You are stubborn." Edward nodded. "Yes." Lady Beatrice looked at Margaret again, and the stiffness in her face cracked enough for sincerity to escape. "If you allow it," she said, "I would like to apologize properly, not as a lady offering charity, as a woman who was wrong." Margaret's throat tightened. She had dreamed of apologies in the barn, and in those dreams they had never felt this heavy. "You may," Margaret said softly. Lady Beatrice swallowed. "I am sorry I did not see you. I am sorry I believed order mattered more than your voice. I am sorry you were made to feel you had no place in a house where you labored." Margaret's eyes stung. She nodded once. "Thank you." Lady Beatrice exhaled shakily and left, as if remaining another moment would shatter her carefully arranged composure. When the door closed, Margaret stared down at the statements in her hands. Edward spoke quietly. "You are shaking." Margaret's voice was thin. "I am holding papers that would have saved me years ago." Edward's jaw tightened. "I know." Margaret looked up. "Do you?" His eyes held hers. "Not fully, but I am trying to learn without asking you to bleed for the lesson." Her throat tightened at the steadiness of that. He moved to the desk and drew out another document. "Your wages." Margaret blinked. "My wages?" Edward nodded. "Calculated from the last month they were withheld, with interest. Properly recorded." Margaret stared. "Interest?" Edward's expression was firm. "A punishment." For those who thought time would bury what they did. Margaret's hands trembled as she took the envelope he offered. It was heavier than she expected, not because of coins alone, but because of meaning. "What am I meant to do with it?" she whispered. Edward's voice softened. "Whatever you choose," she swallowed. "People will think—" "I do not live by what people think," Edward said. Then he added quieter, "And neither will you." Margaret managed a brittle smile. "That will be difficult." Edward's eyes warmed. "I will not pretend otherwise." 3 weeks passed, not quietly. News travelled faster than carriages. Servants talked. Villagers talked. Visiting families sent polite notes to Lady Beatrice that felt like inspections dressed as concern. Invitations that once arrived weekly slowed, then stopped, then returned in the form of cautious inquiries. Edward did not hide Margaret. That alone was a storm. He did not parade her either. He simply treated her as someone whose presence was neither shame nor novelty. He walked with her in the daytime along the safer paths near the garden walls. He asked her opinion when household matters arose. He ensured she had lessons with the librarian, not to turn her into a lady overnight, but to return to her what had always belonged to her, the right to learn. One afternoon, Margaret sat with a book open and could not read a line because her mind kept racing. Edward entered, paused, then asked, "Is the book uninteresting or are you worried?" Margaret shut it gently. "Worried?" Edward took a chair opposite her, leaving distance. "Tell me." Margaret's fingers twisted together. "They look at me as though I am a question that offends them." Edward's gaze was steady. "Let them be offended." Margaret's voice tightened. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple," Edward said. "It is only necessary." She exhaled. "Lady Beatrice's friends came today." Edward nodded. "I know." "They wanted to see me," Margaret said. "Not to greet me, to measure me." Edward's jaw tightened. "And did you allow it?" Margaret hesitated. "I did." His eyes sharpened. "Why?" "Because," she whispered, "I am tired of hiding." Edward's expression softened. "What did they say?" Margaret gave a small, bitter breath. "They said, 'You have a quiet manner for someone who has caused such a commotion.'" Edward's hand tightened on the armrest. "And you answered." Margaret lifted her chin. "I said, 'The commotion was not caused by my existence. It was caused by my erasure.'" Edward stared at her, something like pride flickering through restraint. "Good." Margaret's voice shook. "But then they smiled and they said, 'How fortunate you are that His Highness is kind.'" Edward's mouth tightened. "As if kindness were the whole story." Margaret's eyes stung. "As if I were nothing without it." Edward leaned forward slightly. "You are not nothing, and I will not allow anyone to speak as though you are." She whispered, "You cannot silence everyone." He replied, "No, but I can make it expensive to insult you." Margaret blinked. "Expensive?" Edward's gaze held hers. "Reputation is a coin in their world. I have more of it than they do. I will spend it." The words made her throat tighten. She looked down. "And what do you want in return, Your Highness?" His voice was calm. "Do not call me that when we are alone." Margaret's cheeks warmed. "Then what should I call you?" Edward paused, as if that single question was more intimate than any touch. "Edward." She tried it, quietly. "Edward." His eyes softened. "Yes." She swallowed. "Edward, what do you want in return?" He held her gaze. "The truth." Margaret's breath caught. "You already have it." "No," he said gently. "I have facts. I want you." The room seemed to still around those words. Margaret's pulse thudded. "You cannot want me, not in the way you mean." Edward's voice did not waver. "I can." Her throat tightened. "Why?" He answered simply. "Because when you looked at me in the barn, you did not flatter me. You did not fear me into silence. You were honest. And because every day since I have watched you choose dignity, even when you could have chosen bitterness." Margaret's eyes stung. "Bitterness is easier." Edward nodded. "I know." She whispered, "This will cost you." He replied, "I have spent years living cheaply, Margaret. I am not proud of it." The use of her name without title made her chest tighten painfully. Margaret tried to breathe. "You speak as if this is decided." Edward's gaze held hers. "It is decided for me, not for you," she swallowed. And what if I do not know how to be and what you need? Edward's voice softened. I do not need you to become someone else. I need you to be safe enough to be yourself. Margaret's hands trembled. Safe. Edward's eyes warmed. Yes. The following Sunday, Reverend Hale read the banns. He did it carefully. He did it firmly. He did it as if he were putting a stone on a grave and a foundation beneath a house at the same time. Margaret stood in a side pew, not hidden, while whispers crawled through the chapel like draughts under a door. She heard one woman murmur, "He cannot be serious." Another replied, "He is doing it to punish his household." Someone else whispered, "Or to show himself a saint." Margaret's cheeks burned, and she pressed her hands together so tightly her fingers hurt. Edward stood nearer the front with his head held high. He did not glance back at the whispers. He did not flinch. Afterward, outside the chapel, Lady Beatrice stepped up beside Margaret. Her voice was low. "You are pale." Margaret managed, "I am breathing." Lady Beatrice's lips pressed together. "I have received 3 letters from ladies who once praised my hospitality." Margaret glanced at her. "And what do they say?" Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "They say my nephew is misguided. They say you are either a schemer or a charity case." Margaret's throat tightened. Lady Beatrice continued, voice sharper. "I wrote back that you are neither." Margaret blinked. "You did." Lady Beatrice's mouth tightened. "Do not look so surprised. I have been wrong once. I do not intend to be wrong again out of cowardice." Margaret's eyes stung. "Thank you." Lady Beatrice exhaled, then added, "Edward has changed the household. Do you know that?" Margaret nodded slowly. "I see it." Lady Beatrice's gaze flicked toward Edward, who was speaking to Reverend Hale. "He has always had a rigid sense of duty. I thought it was meant for politics and ceremony. I did not know it could be this." Margaret's voice was quiet. "Neither did I. A week before the wedding, a visitor arrived at Ashcroft who did not belong to gossiping circles. A man in plain but clean clothing stood in the entry hall, cap in his hands, eyes wary as he took in the height of the ceilings and the weight of the chandeliers. Margaret stepped forward, then stopped so abruptly her breath caught. "Father," she whispered. Her father's eyes widened. "Margaret." He looked older than she remembered, not frail, just worn, as if years had pulled at him without rest. Lady Beatrice began stiffly, "Mr. Collins." Edward's voice cut in from behind Margaret, calm and firm. "He is welcome." Margaret's father looked between them, bewildered. "I received a letter." "From a prince." Edward nodded. "I wrote to you." Margaret's father swallowed. "It said my daughter was alive." Margaret's throat burned. She stepped closer, but not close enough to touch. "Not yet." Her father's voice shook. "You did not write." Margaret's eyes stung. "I could not." He looked at her face, taking in the thinness that had not fully left. The careful posture, the way she held herself as if bracing for being spoken over. His voice came out rough. "They said you were dismissed for theft." Margaret's mouth tightened. "They said many things." Her father's jaw clenched. "Why did you not come home?" Margaret's breath caught. "Because I was ashamed." His eyes glistened. "Ashamed in front of me." Margaret's voice broke. "I did not want to bring disgrace to you." His shoulders sagged. "Child, I would rather have your disgrace than your absence." Margaret's eyes spilled at last. Not sobs, just tears that slipped down silently, like a confession she had held too long. Edward stepped back, giving them space without leaving them alone. Margaret's father cleared his throat harshly. "They told me you were lost." Margaret whispered, "I was." Her father's hands trembled. "And now you are to marry a prince." Margaret almost laughed through tears. "That sounds like a story someone would invent." Her father stared at Edward. "Is it true?" Edward answered simply, "Yes." Margaret's father looked back at her. "Do you want this?" Margaret hesitated only a moment. "Yes." Her father's eyes filled. He nodded once, then again, as if trying to accept something too large. "Then," he said hoarsely, "I will stand by you if I am permitted." Lady Beatrice started to speak, but Edward said firmly, "You are permitted." Margaret's father looked down, then up again. "Margaret, forgive me. I sent you away because I had no choice, but I should have come for you sooner." Margaret wiped her face with trembling fingers. "I did not send word." Her father's voice cracked. "We were both wrong." Margaret nodded. "Yes." He stepped forward, awkward, uncertain, then pulled her into a brief embrace. It was not polished, it was not perfect. It was real. Edward turned away slightly, respecting it, but Margaret saw his hand tighten at his side, as if he felt the weight of what had been stolen from her. On the wedding morning, the manor was quiet in a new way, not the quiet of hiding, the quiet of decision. Margaret stood in a simple gown chosen not to impress society, but to feel like herself. Lady Beatrice fastened a small pin at her collar, hands steadier than Margaret expected. "It belonged to my mother," Lady Beatrice said softly. Margaret blinked. "My lady, I cannot accept." Lady Beatrice's voice tightened. "Do not refuse it out of fear. It is not charity, it is acknowledgement." Margaret swallowed. "Then, thank you." Lady Beatrice's eyes shone, and she blinked quickly. "If anyone tries to diminish you today, they will answer to me." Margaret managed a small smile. "That is a terrifying offer." Lady Beatrice's mouth trembled into the faintest smile. "Yes, I believe it is." In the chapel, the pews were not crowded with fashionable admirers. Many had stayed away to avoid being seen supporting something they did not understand. But the ones who came mattered. Reverend Hale, Dr. Whitmore, Thomas Reed, standing stiffly in his best coat, eyes bright with pride. A few villagers who had known Margaret as a quiet maid years ago, and now looked at her as if trying to reconcile old memory with present truth. And her father, seated near the front, cap in his hands, eyes fixed on her like he was afraid she might vanish again if he blinked. Edward stood at the altar straight as a vow, eyes steady. When Margaret entered, he did not stare at her like a prize. He looked at her like a promise he intended to keep. When she reached him, he spoke softly so only she could hear. "You are here." Margaret's voice trembled. "I am here." His eyes warmed. "No one will move you again," Reverend Hale began. The words were familiar, yet they felt new in Margaret's ears, as if the world had been rebuilt into a shape she could finally stand inside. When it came time for vows, Edward spoke first. His voice was calm, but it carried. It did not perform. It declared, "I, Edward Hawthorne, take you, Margaret Collins, to be my wife. I give you my name not as a shelter to hide you, but as a shield that will never be turned against you. I will honor you in public and in private. I will listen. I will stand beside you. I will never again allow silence to be used as a weapon against you." Margaret's breath caught at the word weapon, but it was spoken as metaphor, not threat, and it held no violence, only truth. Reverend Hale turned to her. Margaret's hands shook. She lifted her chin. "I, Margaret Collins," she said, voice clear enough to be heard, "take you, Edward Hawthorne, to be my husband. I do not take you as a rescue. I take you as a choice. I will speak truth to you even when it is difficult. I will not hide, and I will not ask you to hide. I will build a home with you where no one is discarded." Edward's eyes shone, and for a moment the rigid prince looked like a man who had finally found rest. Reverend Hale pronounced them married. Edward did not seize her. He did not pull her into anything improper. He only lifted her hand carefully and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, slow and reverent, as if he were honoring the hand that had carried straw and silence and still remained worthy of tenderness. Margaret's breath shook and she smiled despite herself. Outside the chapel, whispers still existed. They always would. But they sounded smaller now, because Margaret was not alone in facing them. Lady Beatrice stood beside her and said to a stiff-backed lady who approached with a brittle smile, "If you have come to congratulate them, you may. If you have come to judge, you may do so elsewhere." The lady blinked, faltered, then offered a thin, confused bow and retreated. Thomas Reed approached Margaret, face flushed with emotion. "Your Grace," he blurted, then winced. "I beg pardon. I do not know what to call you." Margaret laughed softly, and the sound startled her because it came easily. "Margaret." Thomas's eyes filled. "Yes, Margaret." He swallowed hard. "I am glad you are warm." Margaret's throat tightened. "So am I." Dr. Whitmore nodded once to Edward. "You have done a difficult thing." Edward replied, "I have done a necessary one." Dr. Whitmore's gaze moved to Margaret. "And you have done the braver thing." Margaret blinked. "Me?" Dr. Whitmore said. "You stayed. You spoke. You did not let shame silence you." Margaret's eyes stung again, but she only nodded. Later, in the manor, there was a modest celebration. Food. Music played softly by a local musician. Not grandeur, not performance. A simple gathering that felt like a door closing on the past. Margaret's father stood by the hearth, holding a cup of tea as if it were a delicate instrument. Edward approached him with calm respect. "Mr. Collins," Edward said, "thank you for coming." Margaret's father cleared his throat. "I did not know if I should." Edward's gaze was steady. "You should." Her father's eyes darted to Margaret, then back. "She is precious to me." Edward nodded. "I know." The older man swallowed. "If anyone harms her," Edward interrupted gently. "No one will." Margaret's father looked at him, measuring. "You speak like a man used to being obeyed." Edward's mouth tightened. "Yes." Then he added, quieter, "But I intend to be worthy of obedience, not merely entitled to it." Margaret's father's eyes glistened. He nodded once, rough and sincere. Then, "I will try to trust you." Edward extended his hand. After a brief hesitation, her father took it. Margaret watched, throat tight, as two worlds that should never have met shook hands without humiliation. As evening settled, Edward found Margaret in the library, standing before the shelves she had once dusted in silence. He approached slowly, as if he had learned that sudden movements could still awaken old fear. "You slipped away," he said. Margaret's voice was quiet. "I needed a moment, where no one is looking." Edward's eyes softened. "Are you overwhelmed?" Margaret nodded. "Yes." Edward stepped a little closer. "Tell me what you need." Margaret swallowed. "I need to know I will not wake up and find myself back in the barn." Edward's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and placed a small key in her palm. Margaret stared. "What is this?" Edward's voice was steady. "Your room, and the library, and any door in this house that should never again be used to keep you out." Her fingers curled around the key as if it were sacred. "You are giving me keys," she whispered. "I'm giving you belonging," Edward replied. Margaret's breath shook. "Belonging is frightening," Edward nodded. "I know." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Why are you so certain?" His gaze held hers. "Because you have spent 5 years being treated as if you were disposable, and I am determined that the rest of your life will prove the opposite." Margaret's voice trembled. "They will never stop talking." Edward's mouth tightened into something almost like a smile. "Then let us give them something worth talking about." Margaret let out a small, helpless laugh. "You said that once." "I meant it then," he said. "I mean it now." She hesitated, then said, "Edward." His eyes warmed. "Yes." Margaret's throat tightened. "Do not place me above others to make a point." Edward's expression turned serious. "I will not. I will place you beside me, because that is where you belong." Margaret's breath caught. She whispered, "And if I falter?" Edward lifted her hand gently, key and all, and held it between both of his palms, warm and steady. "Then I will wait," he said, "and I will not let you fall alone." Margaret's eyes spilled again, but this time the tears did not taste like shame. They tasted like release. She whispered, "I used to count winters." Edward's jaw tightened. "Do not." "I did," she insisted softly. "I counted because I thought no one else was counting me." Edward's voice roughened. "I am counting now." Margaret nodded, trembling. "Then let me say something." Edward's eyes stayed on her. "Say it." Margaret drew a shaky breath. "I loved the idea of love once, before Ashcroft taught me that love is not for girls in aprons." Edward's gaze sharpened. "Ashcroft was wrong." Margaret's voice shook. "I want to believe it." Edward lifted her hand toward his chest, not pressing it there, only letting her feel the steady rhythm beneath fabric and title. "Then believe this," he said quietly. "My heart is not a privilege. It is yours, if you will have it." Margaret's breath hitched. She stepped closer, slowly, as if giving herself permission. She rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder, not hiding, just taking a moment of closeness that felt safe. Edward did not move too quickly. He only lowered his head until his cheek brushed her hair. In that small gesture, she felt something shift inside her, the hard knot of survival loosening. The quiet girl in the barn learning she could breathe without listening for footsteps. Margaret whispered, "I will have it." Edward's voice was low. "Say it again." She lifted her head, eyes shining, and met his gaze without flinching. "I will have it," she said. Edward exhaled as if he had been holding his breath since the night he opened the barn door. Then, with a tenderness that did not ask permission from society, he kissed her forehead, slow and reverent, and Margaret closed her eyes as if the world had finally become a place where she was allowed to be cherished. And as the fire cracked softly behind them, and the house settled into a new kind of quiet, Margaret understood that dignity could be stolen for a time, but never truly erased, and that love, when it is honorable, does not rescue a person from above, but meets them at eye level and says, without shame or fear, you may begin again. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.